The carriage wheels ground to a halt in the gravel, the sound like bones breaking. General Valerius didn't wait for the driver to open the door, he pushed it open himself, stepping out into air that tasted of dust and despair. The scarred frontier stretched before him, a landscape that looked like the gods had abandoned it mid-creation. Jagged rocks clawed at a sky the color of old bruises, while twisted, leafless trees stood like skeletal sentinels along the horizon. His new command waited for him. Fort Desolation. The name was more accurate than any imperial cartographer could have intended. The walls weren't so much crumbling as surrendering, great sections of stone had slumped into piles of rubble, leaving gaps wide enough for a cart to pass through. What remained standing was pitted and scarred, the mortar between stones long since turned to powder by wind and neglect. A single wooden gate hung askew on rusted hinges, groaning softly in the dry wind. Valerius adjusted the worn leather strap of his travel pack, feeling the weight of his disgrace settle deeper into his shoulders. No armor. No sword. Just the clothes on his back and the title they'd left him, commander of the frontier garrison. A joke, really. The Empire's way of saying they hoped he'd die quietly out here, forgotten by all except the carrion birds. Commander. The voice came from the gate. A man emerged, if man was the right word. He was tall but hunched, with a face that looked like it had been carved from weathered oak and then left out in too many storms. One eye was milky white, the other sharp and assessing. He wore a mismatched collection of leather and cloth that might have been scavenged from a dozen different corpses. Sergeant Cale, the man said, saluting with a gesture that was half military precision, half theatrical flourish. Welcome to your new command. Valerius nodded, his eyes already cataloguing the figures emerging from the shadows of the ruined fort. A dozen of them, maybe 15. No two dressed alike. One woman with knives strapped to every available surface of her body. A hulking brute with prison tattoos crawling up his neck. A slender man who moved with the silent grace of a professional thief. Deserters. Criminals. Outcasts. The Empire's refuse, gathered here at the edge of civilization. Report, Valerius said, his voice flat. Cale's good eye flickered. 23 souls, Commander. What's left of the garrison after the last incident? Incident? The barbarians got inside. Took what they wanted. Killed the old commander and half the men. Cale shrugged, a gesture that said everything about survival on the frontier. The rest of us were out foraging. Came back to this. Valerius walked through the gate, his boots crunching on broken stone. The interior was worse than the exterior. What had once been barracks were now collapsed roofs and charred timbers. A single well stood in the courtyard, its bucket hanging from a frayed rope. The smell of old smoke and rot hung in the air. Supplies? Enough food for a week if we stretch it, Cale said, falling into step beside him. Water's good, at least. The well taps an underground spring. Weapons, well. He gestured to the motley crew gathering around them. Everyone's got what they came with. Valerius stopped in the center of the courtyard, turning to face the ragged assembly. Their eyes held no hope, only the hard calculation of survivors who expected nothing from the world except more pain. He recognized that look, he'd seen it in the mirror every morning since the trial. My name is Valerius, he said, his voice carrying across the silent yard. I was a general in the imperial army. Now I'm the commander of this fort. You know what that means. No one spoke. The wind whistled through the broken walls. It means we're all here because the Empire has no other use for us, Valerius continued. It means we have two choices. We can wait here to die, from starvation, from the cold, or from barbarian steel. Or we can decide to live. A snort came from the hulking brute with the tattoos. Live? Out here? Yes, Valerius said, meeting the man's eyes. Out here. Starting with fixing these walls. He spent the next hours walking the perimeter, mapping the weaknesses in his mind. Here, the northern wall had collapsed entirely, leaving a gap 20 feet wide. There, the eastern watchtower leaned precariously, its foundation eroded by runoff from the rocky hills behind the fort. The southern gate was the only intact entrance, but its iron bands were rusted through in places. As dusk began to stain the sky purple and orange, Cale approached with a waterskin. Scout spotted movement to the west, Commander. Barbarian riders. Maybe a dozen. Valerius took the water skin, drinking deeply. The water was cold and clean, at least. How long? They're moving slow. Scouting the area. Could be here by midnight if they decide to push. Double the watch, Valerius said. Everyone else gets what rest they can. We'll need it. He didn't sleep. Instead, he climbed to what remained of the western wall, sitting on a broken section of parapet with his back to the cold stone. Below, the fort was dark except for a single fire in the courtyard where two of the outcasts kept watch. The stars emerged one by one, cold and distant in a sky that seemed too vast for human concerns. Valerius thought about the trial. The false witnesses. The forged documents. The way his fellow generals had avoided his eyes as the verdict was read. Treason. A death sentence, commuted to exile because someone high up wanted him to suffer longer. He wondered who it had been, which of the noble houses had engineered his fall. He'd made enemies, of course. A man doesn't rise to general without stepping on toes. But this had been orchestrated with surgical precision. A sound pulled him from his thoughts. Hooves on stone. Not from within the fort, but from the rocky plain beyond the walls. Valerius rose silently, peering into the darkness. At first he saw nothing but shadows and starlight on stone. Then movement, figures emerging from the night like ghosts materializing from the air itself. Barbarians. They rode shaggy frontier ponies, small but tough-looking beasts that picked their way across the broken ground with sure-footed grace. The riders wore hides and furs, their faces painted with white streaks that glowed faintly in the starlight. They carried short bows and curved swords, and they moved with the quiet confidence of predators who knew this land belonged to them. Valerius counted 15. A raiding party, not a war band. They were here to test the fort's defenses, to kill a few sentries, maybe steal what little supplies remained. Standard frontier tactics. He slipped down from the wall, moving through the darkness to where Kale stood by the gate. They're here, he whispered. 15 riders, approaching from the west. Kale's good eye narrowed. We can't hold the walls. Not with the gaps. I know, Valerius said. We'll funnel them through the southern gate. Make them fight in the courtyard where we have the advantage of numbers. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one he had. He gathered the outcasts, 23 scared, armed civilians against 15 seasoned barbarian raiders. The odds weren't good, but they were better than waiting to be slaughtered in their sleep. They took positions in the shadows of the ruined barracks, behind what remained of the stable walls, in the dark mouth of the well house. Valerius positioned himself near the gate, a stolen short sword in his hand. It felt wrong, too light, too poorly balanced. He'd trained with imperial steel since he was a boy, weapons crafted by master smiths. This was a butcher's tool. The barbarians didn't bother with stealth. They rode straight for the southern gate, their ponies' hooves clattering on the stone approach. One of them, a big man with antlers tied to his helmet, dismounted and examined the gate. He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the night, then kicked it. The gate shuddered on its hinges but held. The barbarian kicked again, harder this time. Wood splintered. A third kick, and the gate burst inward, crashing to the courtyard stones with a sound like thunder. The raiders poured through, whooping and shouting. They expected resistance, but they expected it to be disorganized, panicked. What they got was silence. Valerius waited until all 15 were inside the courtyard, their ponies milling in confusion as they realized the fort was empty. Then he gave the signal, a sharp whistle. The outcasts attacked from the shadows. It was messy. Brutal. The thief moved like smoke, slipping behind the barbarian and sliding a knife between his ribs before melting back into darkness. The woman with the knives took down 2 riders, her blades flashing in the starlight. The hulking brute grabbed a barbarian from his saddle and broke his neck with a sickening crack. But the raiders were professionals. They regrouped quickly, forming a loose circle with their backs to each other. Their leader, the man with the antler helmet, barked orders in a guttural tongue, and they began to methodically clear the courtyard, driving the outcasts back with coordinated strikes. Valerius found himself facing 2 barbarians. They came at him together, one high, one low. He parried the first sword strike, ducked under the second, and drove his own blade into the thigh of the low attacker. The man screamed and fell, but the other was already recovering, his curved sword coming around in a vicious arc aimed at Valerius's neck. Valerius threw himself backward, feeling the wind of the blade's passage against his throat. He hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet just as the barbarian closed in for the kill. That was when the sky burned. A streak of light tore across the heavens, brilliant white tinged with violet and gold. It wasn't a shooting star, it was too slow, too controlled. It descended in a graceful arc, trailing streamers of shimmering energy that painted the night in impossible colors. The fighting stopped. Barbarians and outcasts alike froze, staring upward as the light grew brighter, closer. It was heading straight for the fort. "Take cover," someone shouted, but it was too late. The light struck the rocky plain just beyond the ruined northern wall with a sound that was both a crash and a chime, like a cathedral bell breaking. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground that knocked everyone off their feet. Stones rattled and danced. Dust billowed in great clouds, glowing with trapped light. Valerius pushed himself up, coughing. Through the settling dust, he could see a crater where the meteor had struck, a perfect circle of fused glass and smoking stone. And in the center of that crater, something was moving. It rose slowly, unfolding itself from the wreckage. At first Valerius thought it was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But as it stepped from the crater, he realized it was something else entirely. Its form seemed to shift and flow, one moment solid, the next insubstantial as smoke. Starlight danced across its surface, tracing patterns that hurt to look at directly. Shadows pooled around its feet like liquid night, spreading across the ground in inky tendrils. The barbarians recovered first. Their leader shouted an order, and 5 of them charged the creature, their swords raised. It turned its head, or what passed for a head, toward them. Valerius couldn't see eyes, but he felt its gaze like a physical weight. The creature raised a hand, fingers that were too long, too graceful. Celestial fire erupted from its palm. Not ordinary fire. This was starlight given form and fury, a beam of pure white energy so bright it left afterimages burned into Valerius's vision. It swept across the charging barbarians, and where it touched them, they simply ceased to be. No screams. No ash. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, as if they'd never existed at all. The remaining barbarians stared, their faces masks of terror. They turned to flee, but the creature was already moving. It gestured, and tendrils of shadow shot from the ground, wrapping around the raiders' legs, dragging them down. Another gesture, and pinpricks of starlight appeared around each barbarian's head, dozens of tiny, brilliant points that hovered for a heartbeat before converging. Silent flashes of light. Then nothing. In less than 10 seconds, 15 seasoned barbarian warriors were gone without a trace. The creature turned. She walked toward the fort. Her movements were liquid grace, each step causing the shadows around her to ripple and flow. She passed through the gap in the northern wall as if it weren't there, the stones seeming to part for her. Valerius stood his ground, his stolen sword held ready. Around him, the outcasts were backing away, their faces pale with terror. Only Kale remained nearby, his one good eye wide with something between awe and horror. The creature stopped before Valerius. Up close, he could see details he'd missed from a distance. Her form was feminine, tall and slender, but made of shifting constellations and depths of night. Where a face should be, there was only a swirl of stars and darkness, though he had the distinct impression of features, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes that held entire galaxies. She knelt. The gesture was so human, so utterly unexpected, that Valerius almost dropped his sword. She went down on one knee, bowing her head until the constellation hair brushed the dusty stones of the courtyard. "Beloved," she said. Her voice was music and silence, the sound of solar winds blowing between stars. It resonated in Valerius's bones, in his blood. He felt it rather than heard it. "I am Astra," she continued, still kneeling. "I have crossed the void between galaxies to find you. I have burned through nebulae and danced through supernovae. And now I am here. For you." Valerius stared, his mind struggling to process what was happening. This creature, this cosmic entity, was kneeling before him. Calling him, beloved. "Why," he managed, the word barely more than a whisper. Astra raised her head. The swirl of stars that was her face seemed to focus on him, and he felt that gaze again, intense, possessive, overwhelming. "Because you are the throne," she said, as if it were the most obvious truth in the universe. "The unwanted throne of affection. The axis around which our hearts turn. We have waited eons for your awakening." She rose then, flowing upward without apparent effort. "I will protect you," she said, and there was a finality in her tone that brooked no argument. "I will burn your enemies to atoms. I will reshape reality itself to keep you safe. My love is your shield, my devotion your sword." Valerius opened his mouth to speak, to ask what madness this was, but the words died in his throat. Because beyond Astra, beyond the ruined walls of Fort Desolation, the world was changing. The ground trembled. Not the sharp shock of an impact, but a deep, resonant vibration that started in the bones of the earth and worked its way up. Stones in the courtyard shifted, grinding against one another. The remaining walls of the fort groaned as if in pain. And in the distance, the mountains were moving. Valerius stared, his breath catching in his throat. The peaks to the north, jagged, barren things that had stood unchanged for millennia, were reshaping themselves. Stone flowed like water, peaks rising higher, slopes becoming sheer cliffs, valleys closing up as if giant hands were sculpting the very bedrock of the world. Light glowed from within the rock, a warm, golden radiance that pulsed in time with the trembling earth. It looked like the planet itself was waking up. And it was looking right at him. Valerius awoke to stone. Not the familiar, crumbling sandstone of Fort Desolation's walls, but something else entirely. The air in his quarters smelled different, clean, mineral-rich, with the faint scent of freshly turned earth. Sunlight streamed through the narrow window, but it fell on smooth, gray stone instead of the rough-hewn wood he'd fallen asleep beside. He sat up slowly, his military instinct screaming. The room was the same size, but the walls had changed. Where there had been gaps between stones big enough to slip a dagger through, now the masonry fit together with impossible precision, each block seamlessly joined to the next without mortar. The floor, previously dirt-packed and uneven, was now polished stone, cool against his bare feet as he stood. Astra hovered near the doorway, her form shifting between starlight and shadow. "You slept, beloved," she said, her voice like distant constellations whispering. "The night held no threats. I watched over you." Valerius nodded, his mind already cataloguing changes. "What happened to the fort? Come see." He followed her into the courtyard, and what he saw made his breath catch. Fort Desolation was gone. In its place stood something that shouldn't exist on the scarred frontier. The entire outpost was now encircled by walls 30 feet high, made of the same seamless gray stone as his quarters. Towers rose at regular intervals, their crenellations perfect for archers. The southern gate, where barbarians had breached just hours before, was now a massive reinforced portal of stone and dark metal that looked like it could withstand a battering ram for days. Beyond the walls, the terrain itself had changed. What had been flat, barren ground now sloped away from the fortifications, creating a killing field where any approaching force would be exposed. In the distance, mountains that had been jagged and irregular now formed natural bastions, their peaks reshaped into watchtowers that overlooked the entire valley. Sergeant Kale stood in the courtyard, his one good eye wide with disbelief. The other outcasts, the woman with multiple knives, the hulking brute with prison tattoos, the slender thief, clustered together, their expressions ranging from awe to terror. "General," Kale said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "The walls, they grew. While we slept. Like the earth itself was dreaming them into being." Valerius approached the nearest section of wall. He placed his palm against the stone. It was warm. Not sun-warmed, but alive warm, like flesh. And beneath his touch, he felt a pulse, slow, rhythmic, matching the beat of his own heart. The ground trembled. Not the violent shaking of an earthquake, but something gentler, more deliberate. The courtyard stones shifted, rearranging themselves into a perfect geometric pattern centered on Valerius. From the earth between the stones, a voice emerged, feminine, ancient, so deep it seemed to come from the planet's core. "I have slept." The words vibrated through Valerius's bones. He felt them in his teeth, in the marrow of his arms. The outcast stumbled back, but Astra moved closer to him, her starlight flaring protectively. "For eons, I dreamed of stone and magma, of continents drifting and mountains rising, the voice continued. The ground before Valerius swelled upward, forming a low platform of polished obsidian. Then I felt you. A warmth on my surface. A purpose. Astra's shadows deepened. This world body presumes much, she said, her celestial fire flickering at the edges of her form. Presume? The earth voice held amusement now. I do not presume. I know. He is the beloved. The one the stars whisper about. The one for whom galaxies would burn. The platform smoothed, and from its center, a figure began to emerge. Not a human form, but something more abstract, a shifting collection of minerals and soil that vaguely suggested feminine curves. Crystals gleamed where eyes might be, and veins of gold and silver traced patterns across earthen skin. She was both there and not there, present in the stone but also in every pebble, every grain of sand for miles around. I am Terra, she said. This world's memory. Its consciousness. And I have awakened for you. Valerius kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. Another one. Another cosmic entity drawn by this phenomenon. This unwanted throne of affection that had somehow chosen him. He thought of the conspiracy that had exiled him here, the false treason charges, the emperor's cold dismissal, the nobles who'd smiled as he was stripped of rank. Had they known? Had they sent him here hoping these very forces would destroy him? Or had they sent him here to be destroyed by something else entirely? You reshaped the fort, Valerius said, keeping his voice steady. Military command. That he understood. Even if the soldiers were now living planets and star beings. For you, Terra said. The obsidian platform rippled with pleasure. The previous structures were inadequate. They would not have protected you. Now, these walls will hold against any army. The mountains will watch for you. The very earth will rise to defend you. At what cost? Cost? Terra's crystalline eyes gleamed. There is no cost. Only devotion. Acknowledge me. Let me serve you. Let me build for you a fortress that will make empires tremble. Let me reshape this entire frontier into your domain. Astra moved between them, her starlight blazing. I was first. My fire cleansed his enemies. My light watches over his sleep. What can stone offer that stars cannot? The ground beneath his feet, Terra replied, her voice gaining an edge like grinding tectonic plates. The foundation upon which he stands. You burn brightly, star child, but you are transient. I am eternal. I was here before your sun ignited, and I will be here when it dies. Jealousy. Valerius saw it in the way Astra's shadows deepened, in the way the ground trembled slightly beneath Terra's forming. He'd managed soldiers with competing ambitions before, lieutenants vying for promotion, mercenary captains testing boundaries. But this was different. These weren't humans with human limitations. Astra had incinerated 15 barbarians with a glance. Terra had rebuilt an entire fort overnight. If their jealousy turned violent. He thought of the scarred frontier. Of the reports Kale had given him, barbarian tribes massing, dark magic stirring in the hills, Gorak the bloody-handed gathering forces. He needed defenses. He needed time to investigate who had framed him, to uncover why he'd been sent to this specific desolation. And these entities, for all their terrifying affection, offered power. Reality-warping power at no direct cost to him. Only the cost of management. Of diplomacy with forces that could shatter continents. Your offer is generous, Valerius said, choosing his words with the care of a man walking through a minefield. The fortifications are impressive. More than I could have hoped for. The ground pulsed warmly. Astra's light dimmed slightly. But, Valerius continued, this is a military outpost. We have a mission, to defend the border, to protect the Empire's interests. Your abilities could be invaluable. But they must be coordinated. Strategic. He looked from Astra to the shifting earthen form of Terra. Astra's precision strikes eliminated an immediate threat. Your defensive structures give us time to prepare for larger attacks. These are complementary capabilities. Not competitive ones. Terra's form solidified further, taking on more definite shape, a woman of living stone, beautiful and terrible. You accept my devotion. I accept your assistance in defending this position, Valerius said carefully. And I acknowledge the value of what you've already provided. It was a diplomatic answer, not the full acknowledgement of devotion Terra clearly wanted, but enough to appease for now. The ground settled, the trembling ceasing. Astra's starlight returned to its normal glow, though Valerius noticed she positioned herself slightly closer to him than before. Then I will build for you, Terra said. Not just walls. Watchtowers that see for miles. Underground passages for movement and supply. Fortifications that make this place impregnable. All for you, beloved. Valerius nodded. Sergeant Kale. The one-eyed veteran snapped to attention, though his gaze kept flickering to the living stone woman. General. Take the garrison. Inventory our supplies. I want a full assessment of the new fortifications, weak points, blind spots, everything. Then report back. Yes, sir. Kale gathered the outcasts, who moved with a mixture of military discipline and sheer bewilderment. Valerius spent the next hours inspecting the changes. The walls were flawless, no seams, no weaknesses. The towers provided overlapping fields of fire across the entire approach. Terra had even reshaped the interior buildings, turning the crumbling barracks into sturdy stone structures with proper ventilation and drainage. The armory, previously a leaky shed, was now a fortified vault. As he walked the battlements, he felt the stone respond to his presence. When he paused to study the distant mountain passes, the wall beneath his hands warmed slightly, as if pleased by his attention. When he tested a firing position, the crenellations adjusted minutely to provide better cover. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like being watched by something infinitely patient and infinitely possessive. Astra followed him silently for a time, then spoke as they reached the northern tower. She thinks to claim you with stone and soil. But stone crumbles. Soil washes away. My light is eternal. This isn't a competition, Valerius said, though he knew it absolutely was. Isn't it? Astra's form shimmered. We feel what you feel, beloved. Your caution. Your calculation. You see us as weapons to be managed. Forces to be balanced. He turned to face her. We're at war. Or we will be soon. Gorak's forces are gathering. There are shadowy players manipulating events. I was framed for treason and exiled here for a reason. I need to survive long enough to discover why. And you need us to survive. Yes. Astra considered this. Then use us. But know this, my devotion is not conditional on utility. I burned those barbarians not because they threatened your mission, but because they threatened you. There is a difference. Valerius understood. The unwanted throne of affection phenomenon, these entities loved him. Obsessively. Completely. Their powers came from that love, but that love also made them unpredictable. Dangerous. Terra had reshaped miles of terrain overnight because she wanted to protect him. What would she do if she felt he was threatened? What would Astra do? What would happen when more of them arrived? The thought chilled him even as the sun warmed the new stone walls. He completed his inspection as afternoon shadows lengthened. The outcasts moved through the transformed fort with a mixture of awe and unease. Kale reported that supplies were limited but secure, and the new defenses were, as far as he could tell, perfect. Too perfect, sir, Kale muttered as they stood on the southern wall. Like the earth itself wants to keep us safe. Makes a man wonder what it knows that we don't. Valerius was about to reply when the shadow fell. Not a cloud passing before the sun. Something else. Something that drank the light from the sky. He looked up. The air above Fort Desolation darkened. Not with storm clouds, but with absence, a void that spread outward from a central point, swallowing the blue of the sky, the white of the few clouds, even the warmth of the sunlight. In that darkness, shapes moved, constellations being born and dying, galaxies spinning in silent majesty, all contained within a form that was both dragon and not dragon, both creature and cosmic event. Wings of void and starlight spread across the sky, each feather a dying star. Eyes like collapsed suns fixed on the fort. On him. The voice that echoed down shook not just the air, but reality itself. It was the sound of entropy, of infinite distances, of treasures hoarded in the dark between worlds. I have abandoned galaxies for you, beloved. The void dragon descended, and the world held its breath. The sky above Fort Desolation tore open with a sound that was less a roar and more the universe itself being unzipped. Valerius had been standing on the newly reinforced battlements, discussing patrol rotations with Sergeant Kale, when the air grew cold and thin. He looked up to see the stars winking out one by one, not from clouds, but from something vast and dark swallowing their light. A shadow fell across the fortress, not the gentle gradient of dusk, but an absolute, hungry darkness that made the 30-foot stone walls Terra had crafted seem like children's toys. The outcasts below froze in their tasks, the one-eyed veteran beside Valerius gripping his spear so tightly the wood creaked. "By all the gods," Kale whispered, his single eye wide. From the void descended a dragon, but no creature of myth or legend could compare. Nyxa's scales were not merely black but the absence of color, drinking the light around her until the very air seemed to fray at the edges. She was larger than the fortress itself, her wingspan blotting out the horizon, each clawed limb capable of crushing the central keep to rubble. Yet when she landed, the ground did not shake with violence but settled with an eerie, gravitational certainty, as if reality itself bowed to her presence. Valerius felt the unwanted throne of affection thrum within him, a sensation like a tuning fork struck against his soul. It was different from Astra's starlight warmth or Terra's earthy resonance. This was cold, vast, and infinitely hungry. Nyx lowered her head, eyes like collapsed stars fixing on him. Her voice echoed not through the air but directly into his mind, each word a vibration that made his bones hum. "I have crossed galaxies that burned to ash before your sun was born," she said, the void around her shimmering with stolen light. "I have hoarded treasures that would make empires weep, singularities captured in crystal, memories of dead civilizations, the last breaths of dying stars. And I have abandoned them all." She shifted, and the movement revealed glimpses of impossible things within the folds of her darkness, geometries that hurt to perceive, colors that didn't exist, artifacts humming with power beyond comprehension. "For you are my ultimate treasure, beloved. More precious than the heart of a black hole, more rare than a universe born perfect. I offer you my hoard, my wings, my very being." Before Valerius could respond, light and stone erupted around him. Astra materialized in a blaze of celestial fire, her form of starlight and shadows positioning herself between him and the dragon, hands raised with fingers crackling with contained supernovae. "You will not claim what is mine," she hissed, the words burning the air. Simultaneously, the fortress walls themselves seemed to come alive. Terra emerged from the stone at Valerius's feet, her body of living minerals and crystalline structures flowing upward to form a protective barrier. "The earth does not yield to the void," she rumbled, the ground trembling in agreement. "His foundation is mine to shape." Valerius stood perfectly still, his military mind assessing the tactical nightmare unfolding. 3 cosmic entities, each capable of reshaping continents on a whim, now formed a triangle of tension with him at the center. Astra's starlight cast sharp shadows across Nyxa's void dark scales, while Terra's stone barrier gleamed with embedded minerals that refracted both light and darkness. The air crackled with competing realities, Astra's celestial heat warring with Nyxa's cosmic cold, both pressing against Terra's unyielding solidity. He could feel their jealousy like physical pressure. Astra's devotion burned with possessive intensity, Terra's with territorial certainty, and Nyxa's. Nyxa's was the hunger of the abyss given purpose. One wrong word, one perceived slight, and Fort Desolation would become the epicenter of a cataclysm that would make the scarred frontiers name a literal truth. "Stand down," Valerius said, his voice cutting through the cosmic standoff with the crisp authority of a general. He didn't shout, shouting would suggest fear. He spoke as if giving orders on a parade ground, and the sheer mundanity of it seemed to give the entities pause. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Astra and Terra's protected positions. It was a calculated risk, showing trust while maintaining control. His eyes met Nyxa's starless gaze. "Your offer is noted, and your power is evident. But understand this, I command here. Not as your treasure to be hoarded, but as a general with a frontier to defend." Nyxa's head tilted, a gesture that on a creature of her scale sent ripples through the void around her. "Command then, beloved. What would you have of me?" Valerius glanced at Astra, whose starlight flickered with barely contained fury, then at Terra, whose stone face showed no expression but whose presence in the ground beneath him vibrated with warning. He needed to acknowledge each without showing favoritism, a diplomatic tightrope over an abyss of cosmic jealousy. "Astra provides precision," he said, turning to the being of starlight. Her celestial fire can eliminate threats with surgical accuracy, minimizing collateral damage. Astra's light warmed slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on Nyx. He gestured to the fortress walls. Terra provides stability. These fortifications are more than stone, they're a foundation that can be adapted to any defensive need. The ground beneath him settled, the trembling ceasing. Finally, he looked back at Nyx. And you, Void Dragon, offer something equally valuable, mobility and reconnaissance. A fortress is only as strong as its intelligence. You can observe troop movements across the entire frontier without being detected, can you not? Nyx's void dark form seemed to ripple with pleasure. I have watched civilizations rise and fall from between the stars. Your barbarians are less than insects to my sight. Then that is what I require, Valerius said. Survey the territories to the north and east. Map Gorak's forces, their numbers, their dispositions. Look for irregularities. Dark magic, outside influence. The barbarian tribes shouldn't be organizing on this scale without provocation. Astra took a step forward. I could burn their camps from here. No reconnaissance needed. And reveal our full capabilities before we understand theirs. Valerius countered. No. First we observe. Then we strategize. He met each of their gazes in turn. Each of you brings unique value. I will not compare devotion or power, I will deploy each where it serves our purpose. Is that understood? The silence stretched, thick with cosmic tension. Then Nyx inclined her head, a movement that seemed to swallow sound. As you wish, beloved. But know this, my price is simply to be near you. To know my treasure is protected. You may observe from the northern heights, Valerius said, gesturing to the mountains Terra had reshaped. Close enough to respond if needed, distant enough not to, unsettle the garrison. Nyx's form began to dissolve into the void from which she came, but not before Astra shot her a look that could have ignited atmospheres. Terra, for her part, sank back into the stone, though Valerius could feel her presence lingering just beneath the surface, monitoring. As the sky returned to normal, stars reappearing, the unnatural cold receding, Sergeant Kale approached cautiously. Sir. The men are unsettled. Valerius looked down at the courtyard where the outcasts stood frozen, staring upward. The woman with multiple knives had them all drawn, though what she intended to do with them against a void dragon was anyone's guess. The hulking brute with prison tattoos actually looked pale beneath his ink. The slender thief was already scanning the walls as if calculating escape routes. Have them resume duties, Valerius said, his voice carrying the calm he didn't entirely feel. Double the watch on the northern wall. And Kale? Sir. If anyone asks, tell them it's a new defensive asset. Because that's exactly what it is. Hours passed in tense equilibrium. Valerius walked the battlements, feeling the delicate balance he'd established. Astra patrolled the skies as a shimmer of contained starlight, her jealousy manifesting as particularly aggressive sweeps of the perimeter. Terra's presence hummed through the stone, reinforcing weak points almost obsessively. And from the northern mountains, Valerius could feel Nyx's attention like a cold spot on his consciousness, constant and hungry. It was near dusk when the void opened again above the fortress, not the cataclysmic tear of Nyx's arrival, but a precise incision in reality. The dragon descended in a controlled spiral, her form somehow smaller now, compressed to merely twice the size of the central keep. She landed in the courtyard with that same gravitational certainty, and the outcasts scattered to the walls. Nyx approached Valerius, who stood waiting at the top of the gatehouse stairs. In one clawed hand she held something, not a physical object, but a shimmering, multidimensional map that hovered in the air, showing the scarred frontier in impossible detail. Barbarian camps glowed with heat signatures, supply lines traced across the terrain, and concentrations of force pulsed like infected wounds. Your instinct was correct, beloved, Nyx said, her mental voice grave. Gorak the Bloody-Handed has gathered not hundreds, but thousands. 3 major tribes united under his banner, with war parties from a dozen smaller clans. They mass here, at the Bloodstone Canyon. A point on the map glowed crimson, showing a natural fortress of red rock. Valerius studied the dispositions, organized, disciplined, not the chaotic raiding patterns of frontier barbarians. Numbers? 4,000 warriors at minimum. More arriving daily. Nyx's void dark claw traced another area. But this is what troubles me. These signatures. The map shifted, showing energy readings that made Valerius's military mind recoil. Dark, twisting patterns of power that corrupted the very landscape around them. Dark magic. Not tribal shamanism, something more refined. Imperial. Nyx's starless eyes met his. The patterns match no natural phenomenon I have observed in this world's history. They are imposed. As if someone is pulling strings from the shadows, enhancing the barbarians, guiding their movements. She leaned closer, and Valerius caught glimpses in her darkness again, not treasures this time, but memories. Visions of other worlds, other manipulations. This is not merely a warlord's ambition, beloved. This is a puppet show, and Gorak dances for masters he likely doesn't even perceive. The map shimmered, zooming in on a particular concentration of dark energy. Figures moved within it, not barbarians, but hooded shapes that walked with unnatural precision. They were directing something, channeling power into crude altars that pulsed with sickly light. They're creating something, Valerius murmured, his strategist's mind racing. Not just enhancing warriors. Something bigger. Nyx nodded, the motion sending ripples through the void around her. The energy signatures converge here, at the canyon's heart. Whatever they're building, it will be ready within days. And when it is. The map showed projections, lines of attack radiating from Bloodstone Canyon, overwhelming the frontier defenses, converging on Fort Desolation. But more troubling were the deeper implications. Dark magic of this scale required resources, knowledge, access. Things frontier barbarians shouldn't have. Valerius looked from the map to Nyx, then to where Astra's starlight burned on the western wall, and finally down to the stone at his feet where Terra waited. 3 cosmic entities, each obsessed with his protection. An army of outcasts barely worth the name. And now confirmation that the barbarian threat was being manipulated by forces with imperial resources. His exile, the framing, the convenient placement at Fort Desolation just as Gorak began uniting the tribes, it was all connected. And the dark magic signatures Nyx had detected were the thread he needed to pull. They're not just trying to kill me, Valerius said softly, more to himself than to Nyx. They're trying to erase me. To make it look like another disgraced general fell to frontier savages. No investigation, no questions. Nyx's form seemed to darken further, the void around her growing absolute. Then they do not understand what they threaten. For to touch my treasure is to invite annihilation not just of flesh, but of memory, of history, of the very possibility of their existence. Her jealousy wasn't directed at Astra or Terra now, but outward, toward the shadowy figures manipulating Gorak. And in that moment, Valerius understood the true nature of the unwanted throne of affection. It wasn't merely a source of power. It was a catalyst that turned cosmic indifference into obsessive protection. And if his enemies pushed too far, if they threatened what these entities considered theirs, the entire scarred frontier might become the collateral damage in a lover's quarrel between gods. He looked at the map again, at the thousands of warriors massing, at the dark magic pulsing like a cancer in the canyon. Then he looked at Nyx, at the void waiting to be unleashed. Prepare for war, Valerius said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the fortress. But on my terms. Not as a treasure to be defended, but as a general who knows exactly what's coming. And as night fell completely, the stars above Fort Desolation seemed to burn a little colder, a little brighter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The war room of Fort Desolation was a place of impossible contrasts. Valerius stood at the head of a rough-hewn oak table that Sergeant Kale and the outcasts had dragged from the fort's crumbling barracks. The wood was scarred and stained, smelling of old sweat and desperation. Around it sat the human garrison, 23 souls whose eyes darted between Valerius and the 3 cosmic presences that occupied the room's remaining space. Astra stood to Valerius's right, her form shimmering with contained starlight that cast dancing shadows across the stone walls. She didn't stand so much as exist there, a being of celestial fire wrapped in humanoid shape, her attention fixed entirely on Valerius with an intensity that made the air hum. To his left, Terra manifested as a pillar of living stone that flowed and reshaped itself in slow, geological rhythms. Her presence made the floor tremble subtly, a reminder that the very ground beneath them was an extension of her consciousness. Nyx perched on a windowsill that should have been too narrow for her draconic form, her void-black scales drinking the light, her eyes like collapsed stars watching the proceedings with predatory amusement. The humans were terrified. Valerius could see it in the white-knuckled grip of the slender thief on the dagger at his belt, in the way the hulking brute with prison tattoos kept glancing at the door as if calculating escape routes. The female outcast with multiple knives sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled, but her eyes betrayed the primal fear of a rabbit caught between three apex predators. Only Sergeant Kale maintained some semblance of military bearing, his one good eye fixed on Valerius, though even he couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands where they rested on the table. "We face an enemy gathering at Bloodstone Canyon," Valerius began, his voice cutting through the tension. "Gorak the Bloody-Handed has united thousands. Dark magic signatures suggest outside manipulation." He watched the reactions. The humans leaned forward, their fear momentarily overridden by the immediate threat. Astra's starlight brightened, a protective flare that made several outcasts flinch. Terra's stone form solidified, the floor beneath her cracking with the sudden pressure of her concern. Nixa's tail twitched, sending ripples through the shadows in the room. "Our resources are unconventional," Valerius continued, meeting each suitor's gaze in turn. "We must use them with precision." He turned to the humans first. "Sergeant Kale, you will coordinate conventional defense. Fortify our existing positions, establish watch rotations, prepare medical supplies. The rest of you, you know this frontier better than any imperial soldier. Use that knowledge. Scout the approaches, identify weaknesses in the terrain, gather intelligence on Gorak's supply lines." The hulking brute spoke up, his voice surprisingly soft for his size. "General, with respect, what about them?" He gestured vaguely toward the cosmic beings. "They are our strategic advantage," Valerius said, and immediately felt the shift in the room's energy. Astra's light became possessive, Terra's stone form leaned toward him, Nixa's wings rustled like distant galaxies colliding. He turned to Astra. "Your precision is unmatched. When Gorak's forces approach, I need you to eliminate their commanders. Not the rank and file, the leaders. The shamans. The chieftains. Create chaos in their chain of command." Astra's form seemed to glow with pleasure. "For you, beloved, I will pluck the stars from the sky to serve as my ammunition. Every enemy commander will burn with celestial fire." Her words hung in the air, and Valerius saw Terra's stone features harden. Jealousy, cold and geological, radiated from her. "Terra," Valerius said quickly, turning to her. "The fortifications you've created are magnificent. But we need more. I want killing fields established along the eastern approach. Channels dug to funnel attackers into predetermined zones. Hidden firing positions carved into the stone itself. Can you reshape the terrain with that level of tactical precision?" The planetary consciousness seemed to swell with pride. "The mountains themselves will kneel to serve your will, my heart. I will make this ground your loyal soldier." Now Nyx shifted, her void dark eyes narrowing. "And what of me, treasure? Do I merely watch while these two preen?" Valerius met her gaze. "You see what others cannot. I need you to be my eyes where human scouts cannot go. Fly over Bloodstone Canyon again. Map their encampments. Count their numbers. Most importantly, find the source of that dark magic. Who is manipulating Gorak?" Nixa's satisfaction was a physical thing, a deepening of shadows around her. "I will peel back the layers of reality to find your enemies, my horde. They cannot hide from the void." For a moment, the delicate balance held. Then Astra spoke, her voice like silver bells dipped in starlight. "Beloved, why send the dragon when my light could scour that canyon clean? I could burn away their corruption in a single dawn." "Because subtlety has value," Nyx hissed, her scales rattling. "Your fire announces itself across continents. My shadows tell no tales." Terra's voice rumbled like tectonic plates shifting. "My mountains could simply, close around them. Bury them in the earth's embrace. No fire or shadows required." Valerius raised a hand. The gesture was small, but it silenced them instantly. "Each of you brings unique capabilities. Astra's precision, Terra's fortifications, Nyx's reconnaissance, together, they form a strategy. Separately, they're just displays of power." He looked at each of them, making deliberate eye contact. "I need all three. Not one. Not two. All three. The words hung in the air, and Valerius could feel the delicate calculus of their affections shifting. They wanted to be needed. They wanted to be essential. By framing it as a collective requirement, he had given each of them a role that acknowledged their value without explicitly ranking them. For the next hour, they planned. Valerius moved between the human concerns, supply lines, watch schedules, escape routes for civilians that didn't exist, and the cosmic capabilities. He asked Terra to create underground storage chambers for supplies, and she did so with a wave of her hand, the stone floor opening up like a flower blooming in reverse. He requested Astra demonstrate the maximum range of her celestial fire, and she incinerated a distant rock formation with such precision that not a single blade of grass nearby was scorched. He had Nyx describe what she'd seen in her reconnaissance flight, and the void dragon conjured shadows that formed a three-dimensional map of Bloodstone Canyon above the table, complete with moving figures representing Gorak's forces. The humans watched in silent awe and terror. The female outcast with the knives finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "General, if they can do all this, why do you need us at all?" Valerius met her eyes. "Because they're not soldiers. They're forces of nature. You are. You understand tactics, discipline, the human element of war. They provide the power, you provide the control." It was partly true, but mostly it was what they needed to hear. What he needed them to believe. The reality was more complicated. The suitors' powers came with dangerous strings attached, their jealousies as much a threat as Gorak's armies. But the humans didn't need to know that. Not yet. As the council drew to a close, Valerius felt the strain of maintaining the balance. Every word, every glance, every assignment had to be carefully calibrated to avoid triggering a catastrophic conflict. When he praised Astra's demonstration, he made sure to immediately ask Terra about the structural integrity of her new fortifications. When he thanked Nyx for her detailed intelligence, he turned to Sergeant Kale to discuss how to use that information in conventional troop deployments. It was exhausting. More exhausting than any battle he'd fought in the imperial campaigns. In those wars, enemies were clear, they wore different uniforms, carried different banners. Here, his greatest allies were also his greatest vulnerabilities, their devotion a weapon that could turn on him at any moment. "We reconvene at dawn," Valerius said finally. "Sergeant, make sure the watch is doubled tonight. The rest of you, get some rest while you can." The humans filed out, their relief palpable. The female outcast gave Valerius one last, complicated look, part gratitude, part pity, before disappearing through the door. Sergeant Kale lingered a moment longer, his one eye meeting Valerius's in silent understanding before he too left. That left Valerius alone with the three cosmic entities. The atmosphere changed immediately. The professional distance collapsed. Astra drifted closer, her starlight reaching for him like tendrils of affection. "You were magnificent, beloved. The way you commanded them." Her voice trailed off in worshipful admiration. Terra's stone form softened, becoming more humanoid, more approachable. "I have begun the killing fields you requested. Would you like to inspect my work? I could show you the mountains I am preparing to move." Nyx dropped from the windowsill, her form shrinking until she stood in humanoid shape, though her eyes remained those of a dragon. "My reconnaissance will begin at moonrise. But first, treasure, tell me, did my map please you? I can make it more detailed. I can show you the beating heart of every enemy soldier if you wish." Valerius held up his hands. "You've all done exactly what I asked. Thank you." The words were simple, but he delivered them with deliberate weight, making sure each suitor felt equally acknowledged. It was like walking a tightrope over a chasm of cosmic jealousy. He was about to suggest they all take their own rest when he felt it, a new presence. Not in the room, but in the shadows themselves. At first, it was just a deepening of the darkness in the corner where the torchlight didn't reach. Then the shadows began to move, flowing like liquid night. They pooled and coalesced, forming a humanoid shape that remained indistinct, featureless, a silhouette cut from the absence of light. Astra's starlight flared defensively. Terra's stone form hardened, the floor cracking as she prepared for conflict. Nyx hissed, shadows of her own rising to meet the intruder. But the new presence didn't attack. It simply stood there in the darkness, and when it spoke, its voice was the sound of whispers in an empty cathedral, echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. Master. The word hung in the air, dripping with devotion darker than Nyx's void. I have watched from your shadow since your arrival, the voice continued, each syllable like silk over a blade. I am Umbra. The others offer you conquest and defense. I offer removal. Your enemies need not see armies coming. They need not see anything at all. Just darkness, and then, silence. The shadow figure bowed, a motion that made the darkness in the room ripple. My love is the knife that leaves no wound. The poison that leaves no trace. Let me serve you, Master. Let me love you from the places light cannot reach. Valerius stared at the living darkness, feeling a cold dread settle in his stomach. Another one. The unwanted throne of affection had drawn yet another cosmic entity, this one offering assassination and covert operations. The strategic value was undeniable, a being that could move through shadows, eliminate targets without detection. But the cost? He looked at Astra, whose starlight was burning with jealous fury. At Terra, whose stone form trembled with geological rage. At Nyx, whose void dark eyes promised violence. And now Umbra, waiting in the shadows, offering a love as dangerous as any blade. 4 of them. 4 cosmic horrors obsessed with him, each more powerful than armies, each willing to burn the world to prove their devotion. And Gorak's forces were still gathering at Bloodstone Canyon. And the conspiracy behind his framing still lurked in the shadows of the Empire. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the whisper of shifting shadows and the distant, terrified breathing of a human sentry who had glimpsed the new presence through a crack in the door. Then Umbra spoke again, the words slithering through the silence. Shall I prove my worth, Master? Name an enemy. Any enemy. They will be gone before the moon reaches its zenith. And Valerius realized the most dangerous battle wasn't waiting at Bloodstone Canyon. It was right here, in this room, in the jealous hearts of beings who loved him enough to destroy everything, including each other, for his affection. The candle in Valerius's chamber guttered, its flame dancing wildly as if sensing the presence that had been watching him for weeks. He sat at the rough-hewn table, maps of the scarred frontier spread before him, ink-stained fingers tracing the route to Bloodstone Canyon where Gorak's forces gathered. The night was deep, the fortress silent save for the distant murmur of the wind against Terra's seamless stone walls. A chill crept up his spine, not from the cold, but from the sudden awareness that he was not alone. The shadows in the corner of the room thickened, coalescing into a form that seemed both there and not there. It was like watching smoke gather into a human shape, but with edges that bled into the darkness around it. Valerius's hand did not move toward the dagger at his belt. He had learned that with beings like these, such gestures were meaningless. I have watched you, a voice whispered, not from the shadow figure but from the air itself, soft as velvet and cold as the void between stars. Since the first star fell and the earth awoke. Since the dragon descended. I have been here, in the corners you do not see. The shadow stepped forward, and the candlelight seemed to shy away from it. Details emerged, a feminine silhouette with eyes that were pools of absolute darkness, a form that seemed woven from the very absence of light. She was Umbra, the entity of living darkness who had revealed herself at the War Council. Now she stood in his private chambers, having observed him unnoticed for weeks. Beloved, she murmured, the word carrying a weight that made the air feel heavy. You are surrounded by those who would claim you with fire and stone and cosmic hordes. But I offer something they cannot. Silence. I dwell in shadows, and from shadows, I can eliminate what threatens you. Let me be the knife in the dark, the unseen hand that protects you. All I ask is to remain in your shadow, connected to you. Valerius studied her, his mind already calculating. An assassin who could move unseen, who could strike without warning, such a tool would be invaluable against Gorak's supply lines. But he remembered the tension in the War Council, the way Astra's starlight had flickered dangerously when Umbra first appeared, how Terra's stone had grown cold, how Nyx's void had seemed to deepen. Jealousy was a weapon that could turn on him as easily as it protected him. Your offer has merit, Valerius said, his voice measured. But my shadow is not a permanent residence. You would need to operate within a limited range of me. Umbra's form seemed to ripple. My power is tied to darkness and to you. I can travel through any shadow connected to yours, but my effective range is 1 mile from where you stand or sleep. Beyond that, my connection weakens, and I become diminished. But within that circle, I am death itself. I can slip into enemy camps, poison supplies, cut throats without a sound. I can bring you intelligence that even the void dragon might miss. Valerius leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He thought of Gorak's forces, thousands of warriors, dark magic enhancements, supply lines stretching back to Bloodstone Canyon. A conventional assault would be suicide, even with his cosmic suitor's powers. But covert disruption? That could buy time, weaken the enemy before the main battle. And Umbra's limitation, her tether to his shadow, meant she could not stray too far, making her less of a wild card than the others. I accept your services, Valerius said. But there will be rules. You will report to me alone. You will not engage the other suitors unless I command it. And you will not harm anyone under my protection without my explicit order. Umbra bowed her head, a gesture that made the shadows in the room seem to bow with her. As you wish, beloved. I am your shadow, your silent blade. As she faded back into the darkness, Valerius felt a new weight settle upon him, not just the responsibility of another cosmic entity's devotion, but the immediate problem of balancing her presence with the others. He had seen how Astra's eyes had narrowed when Umbra first appeared, how Terra's stone had grown jagged, how Nyx had coiled protectively around him. Jealousy among beings who could reshape reality was not a petty emotion, it was a strategic vulnerability. The next morning, Valerius called Astra, Terra, and Nyx to the central courtyard of Fort Desolation. The dawn light cast long shadows across the stone, and the air was crisp with the chill of the frontier. Astra stood with her starlight shimmering around her, Terra with her form of living stone and minerals, Nyx with her dragon shape coiled elegantly, her void-black scales drinking the light. I have accepted Umbra's services, Valerius announced without preamble. She will handle covert operations against Gorak's supply lines. Her power requires her to remain connected to my shadow, limiting her range but making her effective for assassination and intelligence gathering. Astra's starlight flared, hot and bright. You would let darkness dwell so close to you? She is unseen, unknown. I have burned armies for you. I do not need shadows to protect you. Terra's voice rumbled like shifting continents. The earth provides stability and defense. Shadows are fleeting, unreliable. Why would you trust what hides from the light? Nyx's tail twitched, a gesture that made the void around her ripple. I have flown across galaxies to be your treasure. I offer reconnaissance no shadow can match. Do not let her closeness make you forget our worth. Valerius held up a hand, the gesture calm but firm. Each of you has unique value. Astra, your precision strikes are unmatched for eliminating key targets. Terra, your fortifications make this fortress impregnable. Nyx, your reconnaissance gives us intelligence no one else can provide. And Umbra, she offers what you cannot, silent, unseen elimination. I need all of you if we are to survive what is coming. He paused, letting his words sink in. The jealousy in the air was palpable, a tension that made the very light seem to warp. He knew he had to establish a system, a way to manage their competing demands for his attention without triggering a conflict that could destroy the frontier. From now on, Valerius said, his voice carrying the authority of a general, I will establish a rotation. Each of you will have designated times when you are my primary focus. Astra, you will oversee defensive preparations during the day. Terra, you will work on fortification upgrades in the afternoon. Nyx, you will conduct reconnaissance flights at dusk. And Umbra, she will operate at night, when shadows are deepest. During these times, the others will respect that focus. No interference, no challenges. It was a sacrifice, his personal time, his moments of solitude, all given over to maintaining equilibrium among beings whose affection could reshape mountains or incinerate armies. But it was necessary. He saw the calculation in their eyes, the weighing of his words. Astra's starlight softened slightly. Terra's stone grew smoother. Nyx's coils relaxed. As you command, beloved, Astra said, though her tone held a hint of reluctance. Terra nodded, the gesture sending a faint tremor through the ground. The earth understands patience. Nyx lowered her head. I will watch the skies for you, always. Valerius dismissed them, feeling the weight of their gazes as they departed. He returned to his chambers, where Umbra waited in the shadows, her form barely visible. Your first mission, Valerius said, unrolling a map on the table. Gorak's supply lines run through this pass here. I need you to disrupt them, poison the water sources, sabotage the weapon shipments, eliminate any commanders you can reach without alerting the main force. But your primary objective is intelligence. Bring me anything that shows who is supporting Gorak from the Empire. Umbra's darkness seemed to smile. It will be done, beloved. I am your shadow, and shadows see what others miss. She melted into the darkness of the room, and Valerius felt a faint chill as she departed, a sensation of absence, as if part of the light had been stolen. He sat at the table, staring at the map, his mind racing. The rotation system would buy him time, but it was fragile. One misstep, one perceived slight, and the jealousy could erupt into catastrophe. He thought of Astra's starfire, Terra's earth-shaping, Nyx's void-tearing, and now Umbra's shadow-killing. A lethal harem of deities, each obsessed with him, each capable of destroying the world to prove their devotion. Days passed in a tense rhythm. Valerius spent his mornings with Astra, reviewing defensive positions and planning precision strikes. Her starlight was warm, almost possessive, but she respected the boundaries he had set. In the afternoons, he worked with Terra, directing her to reshape the terrain around Fort Desolation, creating kill zones and hidden passages. Her stone form was solid, reliable, but he could feel the jealousy simmering beneath the surface. At dusk, he met with Nyx, receiving her reconnaissance reports, updates on Gorak's movements, sightings of dark magic signatures, the gathering storm at Bloodstone Canyon. Her void dark eyes held a hunger that went beyond mere loyalty. And at night, Umbra returned. She came silently, emerging from his shadow as he sat by the candlelight, her form materializing like smoke given purpose. She reported her successes: supply caravans found with guards dead from unseen causes, water sources tainted with shadows that induced madness, weapon caches sabotaged with darkness that corroded steel. But she brought no intelligence about the Empire's involvement, not yet. Valerius's personal time vanished. Every moment was scheduled, every interaction carefully managed to avoid jealousy. He ate with Sergeant Kale and the human garrison, listening to their reports, but even then, he could feel the cosmic suitors watching. Astra's starlight would flicker at the edges of his vision if he laughed too loudly with Kale. Terra's stone would grow cold if he spent too long inspecting the fortifications without her. Nyx's void would deepen if he looked too long at the maps without acknowledging her reconnaissance. And Umbra, she was always there, in his shadow, a silent presence that both protected and constrained him. It was on the seventh night that Umbra returned differently. She emerged from the shadows not with her usual silent grace, but with a ripple of urgency. Her form was more solid than before, and in her hands, she held a leather satchel, stained with something dark that might have been blood or shadow. "Beloved," she whispered, her voice tense. "I found this in Gorak's command tent." The warlord was meeting with a figure in imperial colors, a messenger from the east. "I eliminated the messenger, but not before securing this." She placed the satchel on the table. Valerius opened it, his fingers careful. Inside were documents, parchment scrolls sealed with wax that bore the insignia of the imperial nobility. He broke the seals, unrolling the first scroll. The handwriting was precise, bureaucratic, detailing shipments of weapons, dark magic artifacts, and gold to Gorak's forces. The second scroll was a report on Valerius's activities at Fort Desolation, noting the cosmic disturbances, and recommending increased pressure to eliminate him. But it was the third document that made his blood run cold. It was a letter, unsigned, but written in a hand he recognized, the same hand that had written the false evidence used to frame him for treason. The words were brief, chilling: "Ensure Valerius does not survive the barbarian assault. His death must appear natural, a consequence of frontier violence. The unwanted throne phenomenon cannot be allowed to spread. Contain it, or eliminate it." Valerius stared at the words, his mind racing. Someone within the Empire that exiled him was not just manipulating Gorak, they knew about the unwanted throne of affection phenomenon. They knew about Astra, Terra, Nyx, Umbra. And they wanted him dead, not just as a disgraced general, but as the center of a cosmic event they feared. Umbra watched him, her darkness seeming to pulse with concern. "There is more, beloved." The messenger carried a token, a silver pendant with the crest of House Valerius. "Your family's crest." She placed the pendant on the table. It was tarnished, but unmistakable, the same crest that had once adorned his armor, the same crest that had been stripped from him when he was exiled. Valerius picked it up, the metal cold against his skin. His family had disowned him after the framing, believing the lies. But this suggested someone within his own house was involved, or someone using his family's symbols to send a message. The conspiracy was deeper than he had imagined. It was not just shadowy imperial forces, it was someone with intimate knowledge of him, someone who knew about the phenomenon, someone who wanted to contain or eliminate it. And they were using Gorak as their weapon, hoping the barbarian warlord would do their dirty work. Valerius looked at Umbra, her shadowy form waiting in the candlelight. "You have done well," he said, his voice low. "This changes everything." But as he spoke, he felt the weight of the rotation system, the fragile equilibrium he had built. Astra, Terra, Nyx, each would demand to know about this intelligence, each would want to protect him from this new threat in their own way. And their jealousy, already a simmering volcano, would only grow hotter with this revelation. He had uncovered a clue pointing to imperial nobility behind his framing, but the ultimate conspiracy remained unresolved. And now, with his suitor's affections both his greatest weapon and most dangerous vulnerability, he realized the true battle was not just against Gorak's armies, but against the shadows within his own past, and the cosmic loves that could either save him or destroy the world. The lamplight in Valerius's command chamber flickered over the captured documents spread across his makeshift desk. The scent of old parchment mixed with the faint ozone smell that always lingered around Astra's presence. Valerius's fingers traced the imperial seal pressed into the wax, the double-headed eagle of the Solarian Empire, the same symbol that had once adorned his own uniform before his disgrace. He recognized the code phrases immediately. Harvest Moon meant frontier destabilization. Winter Wheat indicated sanctioned barbarian raids. Silver Fox, that was the one that made his blood run cold. It meant elimination of a military asset with plausible deniability. They hadn't just framed him for treason, they'd made him part of a larger operation to weaken the Empire's borders while removing a potential threat. Astra stood by the window, her form shimmering with starlight that cast shifting patterns on the stone floor. "Beloved," she murmured, her voice like distant chimes. "These markings reek of mortal deceit. Shall I burn their source from existence?" "Not yet," Valerius said, his voice steady despite the cold not forming in his stomach. He pointed to a particular line in Gorak's orders. "This outpost mentioned here, Waystation Gamma. It's not on any imperial map. But I served on the Frontier Council for 3 years. I remember the budget allocations for secret forward positions." He looked up, meeting the gazes of his 4 cosmic suitors. Nyx coiled in a corner, her void-black scales drinking the light. Terra stood motionless as stone, her earthy presence grounding the room. Umbra flowed from his shadow, taking semi-solid form. "We need to raid it," Valerius said. "Tonight. Before they realize their documents are missing." Nyx's eyes glowed with violet light. "The void paths can carry us there in moments, treasure. But the jealousy." She glanced meaningfully at Astra, whose starlight brightened defensively. Valerius stood, the chair scraping against stone. He moved to the center of the room, deliberately positioning himself where all 4 could see him equally. "Listen to me. This isn't about who gets to protect me best. This is about uncovering who wants me dead, who's manipulating barbarians, who's betraying the Empire, who knows about the phenomenon that brought you here." He met each of their eyes in turn. "Astra, I need your precision. One stray ember could destroy the evidence we seek. Terra, your control must be absolute, no collateral damage. Nyx, your void tearing must be surgical. Umbra, your darkness must be complete." He took a breath, feeling the weight of their attention like physical pressure. "We do this together. Or we fail together." The journey through Nyx's void path was unlike anything Valerius had experienced. One moment they stood in his chamber, the next, reality folded in on itself in a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries. Colors that didn't exist in the mortal spectrum flashed at the edges of his vision. Sounds echoed from directions that couldn't be measured. Through it all, he felt 4 distinct presences holding him stable, Astra's starlight forming a protective cocoon, Terra's gravitational pull anchoring him, Nyx's void energies guiding the path, Umbra's darkness cushioning the transition. They emerged in a moonlit clearing 5 miles from the coordinates. The air smelled of pine and cold stone. Waystation Gamma lay ahead, a cluster of low buildings nestled against a cliff face, cleverly camouflaged to look like natural rock formations from a distance. Valerius crouched behind a boulder, his military training taking over. He counted guards, 8 visible, probably 4 more hidden. Imperial regulars, not mercenaries. Their uniforms were clean, their movements disciplined. This was no rogue operation. Umbra, he whispered. The darkness at his feet flowed forward, separating into tendrils that slithered across the ground. Valerius watched as guards at the perimeter suddenly stiffened, then slumped silently. Umbra's work was flawless, no blood, no sound, just unconsciousness. Astra, the watchtower. A pinpoint of starlight brighter than any star appeared at the tip of the wooden tower. The guard there had just enough time to look up in confusion before the light enveloped him. When it faded, he lay slumped over the railing, unharmed but deeply asleep. Valerius moved forward, Terra reshaping the earth beneath his feet to muffle his steps. Stones shifted to cushion his weight. Pebbles rolled away before he could step on them. The ground itself conspired to hide his approach. They reached the main building. Nyx extended a claw, and space tore open before the locked door, not destroying it, but creating a temporary portal directly through the wood and iron. Valerius stepped through into a dimly lit command room. Maps covered the walls. Supply manifests lay on tables. And in the center, a communications array hummed with magical energy, a crystal sphere floating above a silver pedestal. Valerius moved to the maps first. His eyes scanned the markings. Barbarian troop movements. Imperial patrol schedules. And red X's marking locations along the frontier, including Fort Desolation. They were tracking us, he murmured. He turned to the communications array just as the crystal sphere began to glow. A voice echoed from it, distorted, magically altered, but familiar in its cadence. Confirm the warlord's advance. The phenomenon subject remains at the fort. Prepare Phase 3. Valerius froze. He knew that voice. Not the distortion, but the rhythm of speech, the slight lisp on the S sounds. Counselor Silas. His uncle's political ally. The man who had testified against him at the court-martial. Before he could process this, alarms sounded outside. Shouts echoed. They'd been discovered. Astra, covering fire. Terra, escape route. Nyx, be ready. He grabbed documents, letters, maps, anything he could carry. Astra's starlight erupted outside, not as destructive fury but as blinding radiance that disoriented the responding guards. Terra's hands pressed against the stone floor, and the wall behind Valerius melted away, reforming as a tunnel leading back toward the clearing. They ran. Imperial soldiers fired crossbows, but Astra's light deflected the bolts, melting them to slag before they could reach halfway. Terra collapsed sections of the path behind them, creating barriers of stone and earth. At the clearing, Nyx already had a void path open. Valerius leaped through, his arms full of stolen documents, his mind reeling with implications. The return journey felt longer. The void's colors seemed darker, the geometries more threatening. Valerius realized he was trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The coordination, the constant attention to 4 cosmic beings' emotional states, the physical strain of the raid, it had drained him more than any battlefield ever had. They emerged back at Fort Desolation just before dawn. The sky was that peculiar shade of gray that promises sunrise but hasn't yet delivered it. And that's when he heard the voices. Astra's chime-like tones, sharp with anger. Terra's low rumble, vibrating through the very stones of the fortress. Claiming he needs you more because your precision spared mortal lives. Terra's voice made the ground tremble. While I reshaped mountains to protect him. Your earthquakes nearly collapsed the tunnel. Astra shot back, her light flaring so brightly it cast stark shadows even in the pre-dawn gloom. I had to stabilize the entire structure. Valerius hurried toward the sound, his documents forgotten in his hands. He found them in the central courtyard, Astra floating several feet above the ground, her form blazing like a miniature sun. Terra stood rooted to the earth, cracks spreading from her feet through the flagstones. And between them, the air itself was tearing. Not metaphorically. Literally. Hairline fractures appeared in reality, showing glimpses of impossible colors and geometries beyond. The sky above developed spiderweb cracks, through which distant stars burned too brightly. The ground quaked in rhythm with Terra's anger. Enough. Valerius shouted, stepping between them. Both turned their attention to him, and for a terrible moment, he felt their full focus, Astra's possessive love burning like a furnace, Terra's jealous devotion shaking the foundations of the world. The cracks in the sky widened. A chunk of reality simply fell away, revealing a void of swirling colors before snapping back into place with a sound like breaking glass. The ground heaved, throwing Valerius off balance. He dropped the documents, which scattered across the trembling stones. And in that moment, as dawn finally broke and light touched the fortress, Valerius realized with cold certainty, he was running out of time. The conspiracy wanted him dead. His suitor's love might destroy everything first. The morning sun had barely crested the jagged peaks of the scarred frontier when the sky began to fracture. Valerius was in his command room, studying the maps recovered from Waystation Gamma, when the first crack appeared. It wasn't a sound so much as a sensation, a tearing at the edges of reality that made his teeth ache. Through the narrow window, he watched as lines of impossible darkness spiderwebbed across the pale blue sky, like glass about to shatter. Simultaneously, the ground beneath Fort Desolation trembled, a low groan rising from the earth as if the planet itself were in pain. He knew before he reached the courtyard what was happening. Astra stood at the center of the training grounds, her form shimmering with contained starlight. Shadows pooled around her feet, stretching unnaturally long despite the morning sun. Her eyes, or what passed for eyes in her celestial visage, burned with cold fire as she faced Terra, who had risen from the earth itself, stone and soil flowing up to form a humanoid shape crowned with crystalline formations. You smother him. Astra's voice was the sound of distant supernovae, each syllable carrying the weight of dying stars. Your constant reshaping, your endless fortifications, you treat our beloved like some fragile treasure to be buried in stone. Around her, the air grew thin and cold. Frost patterns bloomed across the courtyard stones, and the cracks in the sky deepened, showing glimpses of void-black emptiness between the fragments of blue. Terra's response rumbled through the ground, shaking the fortress walls. And you? Your starfire is flashy and dangerous. You nearly collapsed the eastern wall yesterday with your precision strike. You treat warfare like some celestial performance. As she spoke, the earth buckled. A fissure opened between them, splitting the courtyard in two. Stone walls groaned as Terra's anger manifested, the ground rippled like water, sending soldiers stumbling. Sergeant Kale shouted orders to evacuate the lower barracks as the foundation stones began to shift. Valerius moved between them, feeling the conflicting energies wash over him. Astra's cold starlight prickled his skin with phantom frostbite, while Terra's seismic anger vibrated through his bones. He raised his hands, not in supplication but in command. Enough. His voice cut through the cosmic noise, the tone he'd used to halt charging cavalry. Look at what you're doing. He gestured to the sky, where the cracks now showed swirling nebulae and dying stars between the fragments of normal sky. Then to the ground, where the fissure had widened enough that a man could fall into darkness. This fortress, these people, they're under my protection. Your quarrel endangers everything I'm trying to build. Astra's starlight dimmed slightly. She seeks to bury you in her embrace, to make you dependent on her stone walls. And you would burn the world to prove your devotion, Terra countered, the ground settling somewhat but still unstable. Valerius took a measured breath, calculating his words as carefully as he would a battlefield maneuver. Astra, your precision saved us at the imperial outpost. Without your covering fire, we would have been overrun. He turned to Terra. And your earth-shaping created our escape routes. Without your tunnels, we'd be dead or captured. He let the acknowledgement hang between them, watching their reactions. Astra's starlight softened from blinding white to a gentler silver. Terra's stone form lost some of its jagged edges. But you're both right about each other, Valerius continued, his voice firm. Astra, your power is devastating, it must be measured, controlled. Terra, your protection can become confinement if not balanced with mobility. He pointed to the human soldiers who had gathered at a safe distance, their faces pale with terror. Sergeant Kale stood at their head, his one eye wide as he watched the sky continue to fracture. These men need to learn. They need to become more than frightened spectators to cosmic displays. Astra, Valerius said, meeting her star-filled gaze. The archers. They shoot well enough for human standards, but their precision is lacking. You will train them. Show them how to see trajectories as you do, how to account for wind and distance not with guesswork but with certainty. Astra tilted her head, the motion sending cascades of light through her form. You wish me to teach mortals? Yes. Because if you can impart even a fraction of your precision to them, they become more valuable. And it keeps your power focused, measured, applied where it will do the most good without unnecessary destruction. He turned to Terra. The fortress needs emergency shelters. Underground, hidden, accessible from multiple points. Not just fortifications above ground, but escape routes and survival chambers below. Design them. Build them. Make them so secure that even if the walls fall, my people have a place to retreat. Terra's stone features shifted, the crystalline formations on her head glittering as she considered. Shelters, not just walls. Places of safety. Exactly, Valerius said. Protection that doesn't smother, but preserves. Work that complements rather than conflicts. For a long moment, the two cosmic entities regarded each other across the cracked courtyard. The fissure between them began to close, earth flowing back together as Terra's anger subsided. Overhead, the cracks in the sky shimmered, then slowly knitted themselves back together, the glimpses of void giving way once more to blue. But the resolution cost Valerius dearly. He spent the afternoon mediating between them as they began their new tasks, ensuring neither felt slighted. He stood on the archery range as Astra demonstrated celestial trajectories to wide-eyed soldiers, her starlight forming visible arcs in the air that the humans tried to replicate with their arrows. He descended into the newly forming tunnels as Terra shaped chambers from living stone, offering suggestions for ventilation and multiple exits. By dusk, both projects were underway. The archers showed marked improvement, their arrows clustering tighter than ever before. The first emergency shelter was complete, a chamber 30 feet below the courtyard, accessible through 3 separate tunnels, stocked with supplies Terra had drawn up from deep, clean aquifers. Yet Valerius felt drained in a way no battlefield had ever left him. It wasn't physical exhaustion, but an emotional depletion, the constant balancing of cosmic egos, the careful diplomacy required to prevent world-ending tantrums. He retired to his chambers as night fell, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he sat at his desk, reviewing the evidence from Waystation Gamma by lamplight. The magically distorted voice he'd heard during the raid echoed in his memory. Counselor Silas. His uncle's political ally, a man who'd attended family gatherings, who'd praised Valerius's military career before the court. The betrayal tasted bitter, but beneath it was a colder realization: if Silas was involved, then others in his family likely knew. Perhaps even approved. A soft whisper came from his shadow. They sleep, for now. Umbra's voice was the sound of velvet over stone. She manifested as a darker patch in the room's shadows, her form indistinct but present. Astra watches the stars from the highest tower. Terra has returned to the deep earth to gather materials. Nyx patrols the void paths beyond the fortress. And you? Valerius asked without looking up from the documents. I watch your back, as promised. A pause. The equilibrium is fragile. They accept your assignments, but the jealousy simmers beneath. I know. Valerius rubbed his temples. But it's the best I can do. Give them purpose that doesn't conflict. Make their devotion productive rather than destructive. They love you enough to reshape continents, Umbra murmured. But love, like any power, must be directed. You direct them well. At what cost? The question slipped out before he could stop it. He hadn't meant to voice his doubts, not even to the shadow in his room. Umbra didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice held something almost like sympathy. You are the anchor in their storm. Without you, they would tear this world apart competing for your affection. The cost is your peace. The alternative is annihilation. Valerius knew she was right. He'd seen it in the cracking sky, the trembling earth. These beings, these cosmic horrors who called him beloved, their affection was a weapon of mass destruction waiting for a trigger. His role wasn't just to use their powers, but to prevent them from using each other as targets. He spent the night moving between them. He climbed to the tower where Astra watched the stars, listening as she spoke of constellations that hadn't been visible since before human civilization. He descended to the newly dug tunnels where Terra showed him geological formations she'd created, explaining how they'd withstand even direct hits from siege weapons. He walked the walls where Nyx occasionally manifested from void tiers to report no enemy movements in the immediate vicinity. Each interaction was carefully measured. A touch on Astra's shimmering arm. A compliment on Terra's stonework. Acknowledgement of Nyx's vigilance. Small gestures, but necessary ones, the oil that kept the machine from grinding itself to pieces. Dawn found him back in the courtyard, the night's mediation having left him hollow-eyed but functional. The sky was whole again, the earth stable. Soldiers moved with purpose rather than panic, following Sergeant Kale's orders as they prepared for another day. The archers were already at practice, their movements more precise than yesterday, their eyes occasionally flicking upward as if remembering Astra's celestial demonstrations. It was then that the scout stumbled through the gates. The man, a wiry tracker named Rennick whom Valerius had assigned to watch the eastern passes, collapsed just inside the walls, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sergeant Kale reached him first, catching him before he hit the stones. "Report," Kale barked, helping the scout to his feet. Rennick's eyes were wide with terror. He looked past Kale to Valerius, who had approached at a run. "General, the main force." "Breathe, soldier," Valerius said, his voice calm despite the cold dread beginning to form in his gut. The scout swallowed, forcing words out between gasps. "Gorak, his entire army. Thousands. They're not hiding anymore. Marching in formation down the Bloodstone Pass." "How many thousands?" Valerius asked, his mind already calculating supply lines, attack vectors, defensive positions. "5 at least. Maybe more." Rennick shuddered. "And they're changed. Dark magic, sir. Their eyes glow with it. Some have extra limbs, tentacles, claws. Others leave trails of shadow where they walk. They have siege engines pulled by things. Not animals. Things from nightmares." "How far?" 2 days' march. Maybe less if they force march." The scout looked at the fortress walls, then at Valerius, his expression bleak. "They're coming straight for us, General. And they mean to leave nothing standing." Around Valerius, the fortress fell silent. Soldiers stopped their work, turning to hear the news. In the tower above, Astra's starlight brightened. Beneath their feet, the earth gave the faintest tremor as Terra stirred. From the shadows near the gate, Umbra's presence became palpable, a cold spot in the morning air. Valerius met Sergeant Kale's eye. The veteran soldier gave a grim nod. They'd known this was coming. The raids, the supply line disruptions, the evidence of imperial involvement, all of it had been building to this. But knowing didn't make the reality any less terrible. 5,000 barbarians, augmented with dark magic, led by a warlord who had been manipulated into this attack by Valerius's own enemies. Against them, a few hundred outcasts and criminals, and 4 cosmic horrors whose love for him might be their salvation or their annihilation. "Sound the alarm," Valerius said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Prepare for siege. Every man to his position." As the warning bell began to toll, its deep notes echoing across the scarred frontier, Valerius looked at the sky, whole again, for now, and then at the ground, stable beneath his feet. The lovers' quarrel had been resolved, the fragile peace restored. Just in time for war. The warning bell's final echo faded into the cold dawn air, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any sound. Valerius stood on the newly reinforced battlements of Fort Desolation, his breath forming pale clouds in the morning chill. Below him, the scarred frontier stretched out in desolate beauty, jagged rock formations, dry riverbeds, and the distant haze where Gorak's army would appear. 2 days. That's what Rennick had said. 2 days until thousands of dark magic-augmented barbarians would try to wash over these walls like a tide of blood and iron. He turned from the view, his boots scraping against stone that still smelled of fresh mortar. The fortress had transformed in the weeks since his arrival, but now it needed to become something more, not just a shelter, but a weapon. His mind began organizing the chaos into manageable components, the way he'd once arranged legion formations on campaign maps. Human defenders. Cosmic powers. Limited time. And always, the delicate balance of affections that could shatter everything. "Sergeant Kale." Valerius called, his voice carrying across the courtyard. The one-eyed veteran appeared from the armory, his face grim but focused. "General. Status of our garrison." 237 able-bodied, Kale reported without hesitation. All former criminals, outcasts, or desperate souls with nowhere else to go. They're scared, but they'll fight. Better trained than they were a month ago, thanks to your drills. Equipment still patchwork, mostly scavenged from dead raiders or what Terra's been able to shape from the local iron deposits. Valerius nodded, his eyes scanning the courtyard where men and women were already moving with purpose. He saw Rennick checking arrow fletchings, his tracker's eyes missing nothing. He saw a woman named Alara, once a thief from the capital, directing others to stack barrels of water along the inner walls. These weren't soldiers by training, but they were becoming soldiers by necessity. Double the watch rotations, Valerius ordered. I want every section of wall manned at all times. Have them practice shifting between defensive positions until it's muscle memory. And get the infirmary prepared, clean bandages, boiling water, whatever medicinal herbs we've gathered. Already underway, Kale said. The cooks turned her kitchen into a field hospital. Says she patched up enough bar fights to know how to stitch a wound. A faint smile touched Valerius's lips. These people, these cast-offs of empire, were building something worth defending. He felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders alongside the military calculations. As Kale moved to carry out orders, a presence materialized beside Valerius, not with sound or movement, but with a sudden awareness of being watched from within his own shadow. Umbra's voice whispered directly into his mind, a sensation like cool silk brushing against his thoughts. Beloved. The enemy scouts have been eliminated. 3 parties attempting to approach under cover of darkness. Their bodies will not be found, Valerius kept his expression neutral, though the intimacy of the communication still unsettled him. Good. Maintain surveillance patterns. I need to know the moment their main force comes within visual range. Your shadow is always watching for you, the words carried a possessiveness that made the hair on his arm stand up. Before he could respond, the morning light shifted, not brighter, but somehow more concentrated. Astra descended from the sky in a cascade of starlight that didn't burn eyes but instead seemed to clarify everything it touched. She landed gracefully on the battlement beside him, her form shimmering between solidity and celestial radiance. My heart, she said, her voice like distant chimes. I have calculated firing solutions for every approach to the fortress. The barbarians will burn before they touch your walls. Her hand reached toward his face, fingers trailing light that felt warm against his skin. Valerius caught her wrist gently, holding it at a respectful distance. I need you to work with the human archers today. Teach them precision shooting from elevated positions. Astra's light flickered, a visible sign of displeasure. They are mortal. Their arrows are but sticks compared to my celestial fire. Their arrows are what we have in numbers, Valerius said, keeping his tone even. Your guidance will make them deadly. And your fire. He met her star-filled eyes. Your fire I need held in reserve for when their dark magic users reveal themselves. The compliment worked, as he'd known it would. Astra's form brightened. For you, I will condescend to teach these fleeting creatures. But only because you ask it of me, beloved. As she moved toward the archery range, the ground beneath the fortress trembled, not violently, but with the deep, patient rhythm of planetary consciousness. Terra emerged from the stone of the battlement itself, her form coalescing from rock and soil until she stood before him, earthy and solid where Astra had been ethereal. Valerius, she said, her voice like stones grinding together in a comforting way. The foundations are strengthened. The walls will hold against conventional siege engines. But I sense disturbances in the earth where they march. Their magic corrupts the land itself. Can you create killing fields? Valerius asked, his mind already mapping the terrain beyond the walls. Areas where the ground will collapse under concentrated weight. Channels to funnel their advance into narrow approaches. Terra's stony face showed what might have been a smile. For you, I will make the very earth hunger for their blood. But... She glanced toward where Astra was demonstrating proper bow stance to a group of wide-eyed archers. She receives too much of your attention. My fortifications protect you more thoroughly than her fleeting fires. Valerius felt the familiar tension building, the jealous devotion that could crack reality itself if left unchecked. He placed a hand on Terra's shoulder, feeling the cool solidity of stone that was somehow also living flesh. What you're building here will be my primary defense. Without your walls, without your earthworks, Astra's fires would mean nothing. I need you to focus on the outer defenses this morning. Then, this afternoon, I want you to show me the emergency shelters you've been constructing underground. The promise of exclusive time together soothed her. Terra nodded, her form beginning to sink back into the stone. The earth remembers your touch, Valerius. It will not fail you. When she was gone, Valerius let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. This was the dance, acknowledging each suitor's contributions, making each feel uniquely essential, preventing the catastrophic conflicts that had nearly destroyed the fortress just days before. He checked the mental schedule he maintained, morning with Terra on fortifications, afternoon with Astra on firing solutions, evening with Nyx for reconnaissance analysis, night with Umbra for intelligence. Each block of time carefully measured, each interaction meticulously planned to maintain equilibrium. He spent the next hours moving through the fortress, his presence becoming a stabilizing force for the human defenders. He corrected a spearman's grip here, praised a well-organized supply pile there, always projecting calm certainty. When a young man named Corin, transported to the frontier for writing seditious poetry, asked if they had any chance against thousands of barbarians, Valerius met his eyes without hesitation. We have walls they didn't expect, Valerius said, his voice carrying to those nearby. We have defenders fighting for their homes instead of plunder. And we have advantages they cannot possibly anticipate. He didn't elaborate on the nature of those advantages, but he saw shoulders straighten, saw hands grip weapons more firmly. Hope was as essential as arrows in a siege. At midday, as promised, he joined Astra at the archery range. She floated several feet above the ground, demonstrating how even a slight elevation change affected arrow trajectory. The human archers watched with a mixture of awe and terror, but they were learning. Valerius could see their groupings tightening on the straw targets. Your guidance is making them effective, Valerius said quietly to Astra as they observed from a raised platform. She hovered closer, the light around her pulsing gently. They are adequate vessels for my teachings. But tell me truly, beloved, when the battle comes, will you stand beside me on the walls? Will you watch as I burn your enemies from existence? I'll be where I'm most needed, Valerius said, which was both truth and evasion. Your precision will be crucial when they bring their siege engines within range. He spent the afternoon walking the outer defenses with Terra, inspecting the killing fields she'd created, areas where the ground looked solid but would collapse into pits lined with sharpened stakes, funneling channels that forced attackers into narrow approaches where they could be targeted from multiple angles. Her work was masterful, the earth shaped with an understanding deeper than any military engineer could possess. They will break against these walls like waves against cliffs, Terra said with satisfaction as they stood before the main gate, now reinforced with stone that seemed to have grown rather than been built. Your work saves lives, Valerius said, and meant it. As dusk approached, the sky tore open with a sound like ripping velvet. Nyx descended through the void tier, her draconic form shifting to humanoid as she landed, though she retained wings of starless night and eyes that held entire galaxies. Several human defenders stumbled back, crossing themselves or muttering protective charms. My treasure, Nyx purred, ignoring the humans completely. I have flown the void paths above their marching columns. They number closer to 4,000 than 3. Their dark magic users, perhaps 24, travel at the center, surrounded by the largest warriors. Valerius absorbed the information, his mind adjusting calculations. Can you harass them during the night? Not full engagements, just enough to disrupt their sleep, keep them uneasy. Nyx's smile showed teeth that seemed to absorb light. I will make their nights filled with terrors from between the stars. But tonight, when darkness falls. She stepped closer, her wing brushing his arm. You promised me evening for reconnaissance analysis. I wish to show you the void maps I've charted of their formations. The possessiveness in her tone was unmistakable. Valerius nodded. After the evening watch is set. My chambers, 1 hour after full dark. The acknowledgement satisfied her, and she took to the sky again, vanishing into a tear in reality that healed behind her. Night fell across the scarred frontier, and with it came a deeper darkness that pooled around Valerius as he walked to his chambers. Umbra moved within his shadow, her presence like a second heartbeat. They are 30 miles distant, she whispered into his mind. Their commanders argue about approach vectors. Some wish to wait for full moon for the dark magic rituals. Others push for immediate assault. The division weakens them, Good, Valerius murmured as he entered his Spartan quarters. Continue monitoring. If you can deepen those divisions without revealing your presence. It will be done. A pause. Asterisk, you spend evening with the dragon. You know she hoards more than cosmic artifacts. She hoards your attention. Asterisk. Valerius sat at his table, rubbing his temples. Nyx provides mobility and reconnaissance we cannot do without. Just as you provide intelligence and covert operations. Each of you has your role, Umbra. Each is essential. But who is most essential? The question hung in his mind, heavy with implication. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't trigger jealousy, the air before him rippled, and Nyx stepped from nothingness into his chambers. She carried rolled void maps that seemed to drink the lantern light. My treasure, she said, her eyes flicking to the shadows around Valerius with clear displeasure. Shall we begin? The next hour passed in meticulous analysis. Nyx's void maps showed the barbarian army's formation in startling detail, not just positions, but the flow of dark magic between units, the command structure, even the fatigue levels of different contingents. Valerius asked questions, made notes, and gradually developed a comprehensive understanding of exactly what would be coming at his walls. Their weakness is here, he said, pointing to a gap between two tribal contingents that clearly disliked each other. If we can exploit this division early. My void tearing could deliver a strike force directly into that gap, Nyx suggested, her voice eager. Just you and I, beloved. We could decapitate their command before the battle even begins. The temptation was real, a surgical strike that could break the army before it reached the fortress. But Valerius shook his head. Too risky. If something went wrong, if we were separated or you were injured. He didn't finish the thought, but they both knew what would happen if Nyx fell in battle. The other suitors' reactions would be catastrophic. Nyx's expression softened at his apparent concern for her safety. As you wish, my treasure. But know that I would tear reality itself apart to keep you from harm. When she finally left through another void tear, promising to harass the enemy camp throughout the night, Valerius collapsed into his chair, emotionally drained. The careful management of affections, the constant balancing of egos and expectations, it was more exhausting than any military campaign he'd ever commanded. He slept fitfully, dreams filled with cracking skies and jealous whispers. When dawn came, he was already on the walls, watching the horizon. The first day passed in frantic preparation. The second dawn arrived, and with it came Rennick, his face pale beneath the grime of hard riding. They're here, General. 5 miles out and advancing fast. Valerius climbed to the highest watchtower, a spyglass to his eye. At first, he saw only the dust cloud, a brown smear against the horizon that grew as he watched. Then individual elements resolved, the glint of spear points, the dark shapes of siege engines being dragged across the barren ground, the ragged banners of a dozen barbarian tribes united under Gorak's bloody hand. But it wasn't the army itself that caught his attention. It was what hung above them. Dark clouds gathered over the advancing forces, but these weren't natural formations. They swirled in patterns that hurt the eyes to follow, pulsing with sickly violet light. Tendrils of shadow reached down to touch certain warriors, who glowed with the same unnatural energy. The magic signature was unmistakable. Valerius had seen it in the documents recovered from Waystation Gamma, had studied it in the imperial communications Umbra had captured. This wasn't just barbarian dark magic, crude and sacrificial. This was refined, systematic, engineered. The same patterns, the same energy signatures, the same corrupt elegance he'd seen in the documents that implicated imperial forces in his framing. Gorak's army wasn't just augmented with dark magic. It was being directed by it. Controlled by it. And the source of that control wasn't on the scarred frontier at all. Valerius lowered the spyglass, his knuckles white around the brass tube. The conspiracy hadn't just framed him and exiled him to die. It had followed him to the frontier. It had armed his enemies. It was watching from somewhere beyond those dark clouds, waiting to see if Gorak's army would finish what courtroom politics had begun. On the walls below, the human defenders shifted nervously as the enemy host became visible to the naked eye. Some prayed. Some checked and rechecked their weapons. Some simply stared at the approaching tide of violence, their faces pale but determined. Valerius took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in his lungs. He had 237 mortal defenders. He had 4 cosmic entities whose love could reshape continents. He had walls built by planetary consciousness. He had precision strikes from celestial fire, reconnaissance from void paths, intelligence from living darkness. And he had an enemy that wasn't what it appeared to be. The dark magic clouds pulsed again, and in that pulse, Valerius saw the truth: this wasn't just a battle for a border fortress. This was the next move in a game that had begun with his framing, a game whose players remained hidden in imperial shadows. He descended from the watchtower, his expression carefully neutral. The defenders needed to see certainty, not suspicion. But as he reached the courtyard and began issuing final orders, his eyes kept returning to those unnatural clouds, to the magic signatures that shouldn't be here, to the confirmation that someone from the Empire wasn't just manipulating events from afar. They were here. Watching. Waiting. And Valerius realized with cold clarity that today's battle would determine more than whether Fort Desolation stood or fell. It would determine whether the conspiracy decided he was worth killing personally, or whether they would continue using proxies like Gorak. The warning bell began tolling again, each strike vibrating through stone and bone alike. Somewhere in the distance, a barbarian war horn answered, its note long and mournful and filled with promises of violence. Somewhere closer, within the fortress itself, Astra's light brightened in anticipation. Terra's stone foundations shifted, settling into defensive readiness. Nyx circled high above, her void tearing creating brief ripples in the sky. And in Valerius's shadow, Umbra coiled, waiting for her moment. 4,000 against 237. Dark magic against cosmic affection. A framed general against the empire that had discarded him. Valerius climbed back to the battlements, his hand resting on the cool stone Terra had shaped for him. He watched the dark clouds pulse with imperial magic, watched the army spread out before his walls, watched the first siege engines being positioned. "Let them come," he said quietly, the words carried away by the frontier wind. "Let them all come." The first light of dawn bled crimson across the scarred frontier, staining the unnatural dark clouds that pulsed above Gorak's army. Valerius stood on the reinforced battlements of Fort Desolation, his breath misting in the chill air. Below, the barbarian host stretched across the barren plains like a living shadow, 4,000 warriors augmented with dark magic, their armor glinting with obsidian runes that seemed to drink the morning light. Sergeant Kale stood beside him, his one good eye squinting at the distant siege engines being wheeled into position. "They've got trebuchets, General. And something else, those catapults with glowing sigils carved into the arms." Valerius followed his gaze. Among the conventional siege weapons stood 3 massive catapults, their frames twisted with dark wood that seemed to writhe even from this distance. At their bases, robed figures moved with unnatural precision, chanting in low tones that carried across the silent battlefield as a faint, discordant hum. The air around the weapons shimmered with violet energy, distorting the landscape behind them. "Dark magic enhancements," Valerius murmured, his military mind cataloging threats even as his thoughts raced to manage the delicate balance behind him. He could feel their presences without turning, Astra's starlight warmth at his left shoulder, Terra's grounding solidity at his right, Nyx's void chill somewhere above in the pre-dawn sky, and Umbra's shadowy awareness coiled within his own. "Beloved," Astra's voice chimed like celestial bells, her form of shifting starlight and shadows solidifying beside him. "The central catapult's operator wears a commander's sigil. I could remove him before they fire." Before Valerius could respond, Terra's voice rumbled through the stone beneath their feet. "My walls will hold, beloved. Let them waste their first volley. I have reinforced the outer layer with crystalline latticework 3 spans deep." Valerius felt the tension between them like static before a storm. He kept his gaze forward. "Hold positions. Let's see what they've brought." The first shot came not from the enhanced catapults, but from a conventional trebuchet. A massive stone arced through the air, trailing dark smoke. It struck Terra's outer wall with a thunderous impact that shook the entire fortress. Dust and debris erupted, but when it cleared, the wall stood firm, the crystalline lattice Terra had mentioned visible through the cracked outer layer like glowing veins in stone. A low growl of approval rumbled through the ground. "See." Terra's voice held smug satisfaction. Then the enhanced catapults fired. 3 projectiles launched simultaneously, each trailing violet fire that tore screaming rents in the air itself. They weren't stones, they were spheres of compressed darkness that pulsed with malevolent energy. The first struck the same section of wall, and reality seemed to buckle at the point of impact. The crystalline lattice flashed blinding white before shattering into dust. Stone evaporated rather than broke, leaving a gaping hole 4 meters wide in the outer defense. The second projectile hit 30 meters to the left, and the third overshot, crashing into the inner courtyard where it exploded in a sphere of silent darkness that consumed everything within 10 meters before winking out, leaving only smooth, glassy earth. Valerius didn't need to look to know Terra's reaction. The entire fortress shuddered as if struck by an earthquake, and a roar of pure fury echoed through the stone, not through the air, but through the very bedrock. Cracks raced up the remaining walls, and for a terrifying moment, Valerius thought the entire fortress might collapse from her rage alone. "Terra," he shouted, turning from the battlements. The planetary consciousness manifested in the courtyard below, her form of shifting stone and soil trembling with anger. "They damaged my work. My gift to you." Each word made the ground heave. "Repair it," Valerius commanded, his voice cutting through her fury. "Channel that energy into reconstruction. Show them your strength isn't just in breaking, but in rebuilding." For a heartbeat, he thought she might refuse. Then the cracks in the walls began sealing themselves, new stone flowing like liquid to fill the gap. But he could see the cost. Terra's form flickered, becoming less distinct, as if the effort drained her essence. "Astra," Valerius said, turning back to the battlefield. "The operators. Now." Starlight gathered beside him, condensing into a bow of pure light. Astra didn't bother with arrows, she drew back the string, and a bolt of concentrated starfire formed between her fingers. It launched with a sound like shattering glass, crossing the kilometer to the battlefield in an eye blink. The central catapult's operator, the one with the commander's sigil, vanished in a flash of white light so bright Valerius had to look away. When his vision cleared, the catapult stood undamaged, but the operator and the 3 robed chanters around him were gone, replaced by a circle of fused glass glowing with residual heat. Astra fired twice more in rapid succession. 2 more operators fell, their enhanced catapults now silent. But as she prepared a 4th shot, Valerius felt Terra's attention waver. The flow of stone repairing the wall slowed, then stopped halfway through the gap. "Beloved watches only her," Terra's voice grumbled through the stone, petulant and wounded. Valerius clenched his jaw. He leaned over the battlement, shouting down to where Terra's form still worked on the wall. "Your reconstruction is magnificent. Look how quickly you heal what they break." The stone flowed faster again, but he could feel her jealousy like a weight in his chest. He was dividing himself, and every division weakened their defense. Below, the barbarians were adapting. They moved the remaining enhanced catapult behind a screen of infantry, making a clear shot impossible. Conventional trebuchets continued firing, keeping pressure on the walls. Sergeant Kale organized the human defenders, directing crossbow fire at scaling parties that approached with ladders and grapples. "Nyx," Valerius called upward. The void dragon descended from the pre-dawn sky, her form of shimmering darkness and star scales folding itself into a more compact shape as she landed on the battlement beside him. "Their supply train stretches 2 miles back, beloved. Wagons of dark stone for their magic, food, siege equipment reserves. Disrupt it. But stay visible enough that they know it's you." Valerius kept part of his attention on Terra's reconstruction, part on Astra's positioning, now part on Nyx's mission. The strain made his temples throb. Nyx's void tearing was a silent, terrifying thing. She didn't fly to the supply train, she stepped into a rip in reality that appeared before her and emerged from another 2 miles behind enemy lines. From his vantage, Valerius saw flashes of darkness among the supply wagons, heard distant screams carried on the wind. Wagons overturned, their contents spilling. One particularly large explosion suggested Nyx had found the darkstone reserves. But as she worked, Valerius felt Umbra's presence withdraw slightly from his shadow. The living darkness didn't speak, but the cooling of the air around him told Valerius everything. Umbra disliked being overlooked when others received attention. For hours, the siege wore on. Valerius moved constantly along the battlements, praising Terra's repairs here, admiring Astra's precision there, acknowledging Nyx's successful raids when she reported back, making sure to stand in shadowed areas so Umbra would feel included. It was a dance more exhausting than any battlefield command he'd ever given. Each time he focused too long on one, another would falter. Once, when he spent 10 minutes directing Astra's fire at a concentration of barbarian shamans who were reinforcing the dark magic on the remaining enhanced catapult, Terra let a section of repaired wall crumble again from neglect. Valerius had to rush to that section, placing his hand on the stone and speaking directly to her essence within it, praising the unique beauty of her crystalline latticework until the wall regrew stronger than before. Another time, while coordinating with Nyx on a second supply raid, Umbra's intelligence reports grew terse, then stopped altogether for nearly an hour. Valerius had to retreat to his command tent, the most shadowed location in the fortress, and spend precious minutes discussing nothing of importance just to reassure the entity of living darkness. The human defenders fought valiantly under Sergeant Kale's direction. Rennick the scout moved along the walls, pointing out weaknesses in the barbarian formations. But they were outnumbered 20-1, and without the cosmic suitor's interventions, the fortress would have fallen within the first hour. As afternoon waned, a lull settled over the battlefield. The barbarians pulled back their infantry, leaving the siege engines silent. The unnatural dark cloud still churned overhead, but the violet pulses had slowed. In the sudden quiet, the only sounds were the moans of wounded from both sides and the distant crackle of fires Nyx had started among the supply wagons. Valerius leaned against the battlement, exhaustion weighing every limb. He'd eaten nothing since dawn, drunk only when Sergeant Kale forced a water skin into his hands. Managing the siege was one thing, managing the jealous affections of cosmic entities while under attack was another entirely. Then movement caught his eye. From the barbarian lines, a single figure approached under a white parley flag. Not a messenger or subordinate, but Gorak the bloody-handed himself. The warlord was massive, even at this distance, a full head taller than the largest of his warriors, his armor fashioned from what looked like fused bone and dark metal. He carried no weapon, but the air around him shimmered with the same violet energy that powered the enhanced catapults. He stopped halfway between the armies, well out of bowshot but clearly visible. "He wants to talk," Sergeant Kale grunted. "Probably demands our surrender." Valerius straightened, pushing fatigue aside. "Lower the gate. I'll meet him." "General, that's the only way to learn what he really wants." Valerius descended from the battlements, aware of four presences following him, Astra's starlight, Terra's grounding, Nyx's void chill, and Umbra's shadow, all clinging to him as he moved. The main gate, a massive construct of ironwood reinforced with Terra's stone, groaned open just enough for Valerius to step through. He walked out alone, stopping 10 paces from Gorak. Up close, the warlord was even more imposing. His face was a network of scars and dark tattoos that pulsed faintly with magic. His eyes held no humanity, only violet light that swirled like captured storms. "General Valerius," Gorak's voice was a gravelly rasp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You fight well for a disgraced man." "State your terms," Valerius said flatly. Gorak smiled, revealing teeth filed to points and stained dark. "No terms. Only a message from those who watch." He gestured vaguely eastward, toward the Empire. "They are most interested in your celestial harem." The word hung in the air between them. Valerius kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. How could they know? The cosmic suitors had been careful, their interventions masked as natural phenomena or military ingenuity. "They've seen the starfire that snipes my commanders from impossible distances," Gorak continued, as if reading his thoughts. "The walls that repair themselves. The shadows that move with intelligence. The void that tears at my supply lines." He took a step closer, and the violet light in his eyes intensified. "For entities, they think. Perhaps more. All devoted to you." Valerius said nothing. "My orders were to test your defenses, then take you alive." Gorak's smile widened. "They want to study you. To understand how a failed general commands the affection of cosmic powers. To replicate it, perhaps." Behind Valerius, he felt the reactions. Astra's starlight brightened with protective fury. Terra's anger made the ground tremble faintly. Nyx's void chill dropped the temperature around them. Umbra's shadow deepened. "You won't take me alive," Valerius said quietly. "No," Gorak agreed. "I won't. Because I've seen what they do. And I think killing you will be more interesting than capturing you." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried perfectly. "When you die, will they mourn? Will they destroy this world in their grief? My masters think they'll simply find another to love. I think, they'll burn everything." He stepped back, raising his voice again. Tomorrow at dawn, we finish this. No more testing. Every warrior, every spell, every drop of dark magic we've been given. We'll overwhelm your pretty walls and your celestial guardians. And I'll take your head while they watch. Gorak turned and walked back toward his lines, the parley flag discarded on the ground behind him. Valerius stood watching him go, the warlord's words echoing in his mind. They knew. The imperial conspiracy knew about the cosmic suitors. This wasn't just about framing him or destabilizing the frontier anymore. This was about harvesting the unwanted throne of affection itself. He turned back toward Fort Desolation. The gate groaned open to receive him. As he stepped through, he felt all four of them pressing close, Astra's light, Terra's solidity, Nyx's void, Umbra's shadow, each radiating protective devotion that was as terrifying as the army outside their walls. Tomorrow at dawn, Gorak would throw everything at them. And Valerius would have to manage not just a battle, but the jealous affections of cosmic entities who might very well burn the world if he fell. The gate closed behind him with a final, ominous thud. The parley ground between Fort Desolation and Gorak's encampment was a strip of scarred earth where nothing grew. Valerius stood alone, the wind whipping his worn military coat around him, the scent of ozone and distant decay heavy in the air. Gorak the Bloody-Handed approached with four of his chieftains, each bearing the telltale signs of dark magic augmentation, veins pulsing with black light beneath their skin, eyes glowing with unnatural crimson. The barbarian warlord himself was a mountain of muscle and iron, his hands stained permanently dark from countless battles, but it was the intelligence in his gaze that unsettled Valerius most. "You've made quite the home here, General," Gorak said, his voice like grinding stones. He gestured toward Fort Desolation, where Terra's earthworks rose in impossible geometries against the gray sky. "My masters told me you'd attract peculiar attention. They didn't mention you'd build a palace with it." Valerius kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. The imperial documents they'd captured spoke of enhancements, but this was confirmation of direct manipulation. "Your masters," he repeated, letting the words hang between them. "The same ones who gave you those enhancements? The same ones who told you to come here?" Gorak's laughter was a short, harsh bark. "Months ago, when the first imperial agent found me. A nobleman, fancy robes, fancy words. Said there was a disgraced general coming to the frontier who carried something valuable. Not gold or weapons. Something celestial." The warlord's enhanced eyes narrowed. "They offered me dark magic rituals, siege engines from imperial forges, enough supplies to unite all the tribes under my banner. All I had to do was capture you alive and secure any phenomena around you for study." Valerius felt cold settle in his gut. They knew. Not just about his framing, but about the unwanted throne of affection phenomenon itself. This wasn't about eliminating a political rival, this was about harvesting whatever cosmic anomaly had made him the center of these terrifying affections. He forced himself to breathe evenly, to keep his hands from clenching at his sides. "And yet you're telling me this," Valerius said, his voice carefully measured. "Why reveal your patron's plans?" "Because I'm not their dog," Gorak snarled, the dark magic in him flaring momentarily, causing the ground at his feet to crackle with black energy. "They think they can control me with their gifts. They think I'll deliver you trussed up like a festival goose. But I've seen what follows you, General. The starfire that burns men to ash. The earth that moves like living flesh. The shadows that whisper secrets." He leaned forward, his breath smelling of blood and ozone. "I want to see what happens when I kill you at dawn. I want to see if your celestial harem destroys this entire frontier in their grief, or if they simply fade away. My masters want to study the phenomenon. I want to break it." Valerius's mind worked through the implications with military precision. Gorak had been approached months ago, before Valerius even arrived at the frontier. The conspiracy had been waiting for him, using the barbarians as both weapon and laboratory. The dark magic enhancements weren't just for strength, they were monitoring devices, ways to observe the phenomenon's effects. And the nobleman Gorak mentioned. Valerius needed a name, a house, anything. He let his shoulders slump slightly, a calculated show of weariness. "You have 4,000 enhanced warriors. I have a fortress held together by the jealous attentions of cosmic entities who might turn on each other at any moment." Valerius met Gorak's gaze. "What are your terms for surrender?" The question hung in the air. Gorak's chieftains exchanged glances, but the warlord himself studied Valerius with renewed interest. "You'd surrender? After all this?" "I was a general of the Empire," Valerius said, letting bitterness color his tone. "I know when a battle is unwinnable. But I won't be paraded through the capital in chains. If I surrender, it's on the condition that my people here, the humans at Fort Desolation, are allowed to leave unharmed. And that whatever happens to me happens quickly, without torture or spectacle." It was a gamble. Valerius had to make it believable enough that Gorak would return to his camp thinking he'd won, arrogant enough to let his guard down. And he had to do it while knowing that somewhere in the shifting shadows at his feet, Umbra was listening, waiting for her moment. Gorak considered for a long moment, the dark magic in him pulsing rhythmically. "Dawn," he said finally. "You have until dawn to make your decision. Come out with your hands empty, your people behind you, and I'll grant them passage east. You'll die cleanly. Refuse." He gestured toward the fortress. "And I'll tear that place apart stone by stone to get to you, and everyone inside will wish they'd never been born." He turned to leave, his chieftains falling in behind him. As they walked back toward the enemy camp, Valerius remained standing in the parley ground, watching them go. He didn't look down at his shadow, didn't acknowledge the subtle darkening that peeled away from him and flowed across the ground like spilled ink, following Gorak's retreating form. Umbra understood her role without being told, shadow the warlord, listen to everything, learn what she could about the imperial agent. Valerius turned and walked back to Fort Desolation, his steps measured. The gates groaned open before him, and he passed through Terra's reinforced walls, feeling the earth consciousness's attention on him like a physical weight. In the courtyard, Sergeant Kale waited with a contingent of defenders, their faces tense. "Sir?" Kale asked, his one eye searching Valerius's expression. "Prepare the defenders," Valerius said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "But not for surrender. For the most coordinated attack this fortress has ever seen." He moved through the fortress with purpose, climbing to the central command tower where he could oversee the entire battlefield. From this height, he could see Gorak's camp spreading across the plain like a dark infection, thousands of tents, siege engines being assembled, the unnatural dark clouds pulsing above them. The enhanced barbarians moved with synchronized precision that spoke of more than just tribal discipline. They were being directed, controlled through the dark magic that infused them. Hours passed. Valerius reviewed defensive positions, spoke with Kale about troop deployments, checked on the human archers Astra had been training. Everywhere he went, he felt the jealous attentions of his cosmic suitors like threads pulling at him. Terra's presence was a constant pressure in the stone around him, asking without words if he needed more fortifications. Astra's starlight occasionally flickered at the edge of his vision, a silent offer of precision destruction. Nyx's void dragon form circled high above, visible only as a distortion in the sky. And Umbra, she was still out there, in the enemy camp. As dusk began to settle over the scarred frontier, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Valerius felt a familiar cold presence return to his shadow. He retreated to his private chambers, the only place where he could speak without being overheard by the entire fortress. Umbra coalesced from the darkness in the corner of the room, her form shifting between solidity and shadow. He met with the imperial agent immediately after returning, she whispered, her voice like the sound of silk tearing. In a tent at the center of the camp, warded against scrying. "The agent is Lord Cashin of House Vorlex." The name hit Valerius like a physical blow. House Vorlex, rivals to House Valerius's former patrons, the ones who had sponsored his military career before his disgrace. Cashin was a minor noble, but ambitious, known for his interest in forbidden magics and experimental rituals. If he was here, on the frontier, personally overseeing this operation. "What did you learn?" Valerius asked, keeping his voice low. "They have monitoring artifacts embedded in every enhanced warrior," Umbra continued, her form flickering as she recalled the details. "Designed to record the emotional resonance," Cashin called it. "The phenomenon's effects. They want to replicate it, weaponize it. Gorak is supposed to capture you alive, but Cashin knows the warlord plans to kill you. He's allowing it, he wants to see what happens when the focal point of the phenomenon is destroyed." Valerius paced the small room, his mind assembling the pieces. House Vorlex had framed him, exiled him to the frontier where they knew the unwanted throne of affection would manifest, or perhaps they had caused it to manifest. They were using Gorak and the barbarians as a controlled experiment, observing how the cosmic entities reacted, how their powers manifested, all while pushing Valerius to his limits to see what the phenomenon could do under pressure. Cassian has a personal guard of 12 imperial mages, Umbra added. They're maintaining the dark magic enhancements and the monitoring network. If we can eliminate them, the enhancements on the barbarians will fail, or at least become unstable. Valerius stopped pacing. A plan began to form in his mind, complex and dangerous, requiring perfect timing and coordination. He would need all of them: Astra's precision, Terra's reshaping, Nyx's mobility, Umbra's infiltration. And he would need to manage their jealousies carefully, assign them roles that played to their strengths without triggering conflict. He spent the next hour refining the plan, considering angles of attack, fallback positions, contingencies. As full darkness fell over the frontier, he called his suitors to the command tower. They arrived one by one, their presences filling the space with competing energies, Astra's starlight making the air crackle, Terra's earthy solidity making the stone floor hum, Nyx's void essence creating pockets of cold emptiness, Umbra's shadows deepening the corners of the room. Valerius stood before them, a map of the battlefield spread on the central table. Gorak plans a full assault at dawn, he began, his voice calm and authoritative. But we're not going to wait for it. We're going to strike first, tonight, with a coordinated attack that targets their command structure and disables their enhancements. He pointed to the map. Astra, I need you to eliminate the imperial mages maintaining the dark magic network. 12 targets, spread throughout the camp. They'll be warded, but your starfire can penetrate any magical defense if you strike simultaneously. Astra's form brightened with pleasure, starlight dancing around her. They will burn like paper before your will, beloved. Terra, Valerius continued, turning to the planetary consciousness. When Astra strikes, the enhancements will fail or become unstable. I need you to reshape the battlefield, create chasms between enemy units, raise earthworks to separate their forces, collapse the ground beneath their siege engines. Terra's presence settled like a mountain. The earth will obey, for you. Nyx, Valerius said, meeting the void dragon's shimmering eyes. After the initial disruption, I need you to tear voids in their supply lines and reinforcement routes. Isolate Gorak's command tent from the rest of the army. If Cassian tries to flee, you're the only one fast enough to intercept him. Nyx coiled around the edge of the room, her scales drinking the light. He will not escape your justice. And Umbra, Valerius finished, looking toward the shadows. You'll be with me. We're going directly for Gorak and Cassian. While the rest of the army is in chaos, we'll take out their leadership. For a moment, there was silence in the tower as his suitors processed the plan. Then Astra spoke, her voice sharp with sudden jealousy. Why does Umbra get to remain at your side during the most dangerous part? My starfire could protect you better than any shadow. Terra's presence rumbled through the stone. My earth could shield you completely. You should be with me, where you are safest. Nyx hissed, void energy crackling around her. My voids could transport you anywhere on the battlefield instantly. I should be your escort. Umbra said nothing, but her shadows deepened, a silent challenge to the others. Valerius felt the tension in the room building, the competing affections threatening to erupt into reality-warping conflict. He held up a hand, his expression stern. Each of you has a crucial role that only you can fulfill. Astra's precision, Terra's control of the battlefield, Nyx's mobility, Umbra's infiltration, I need all of it, working together. This isn't about who stays closest to me. This is about defeating an enemy that wants to destroy everything we've built here. But the damage was done. Astra's starlight flared brighter, hot with indignation. You always favor her. She lurks in your shadow, whispers in your ear, while I stand on walls training humans to shoot arrows. And you think reshaping mountains is more important? Terra's voice was like grinding continents. I hold this fortress together while you burn single targets. Nyx's form shimmered with agitated energy. I see everything from the void, yet you give me messenger duty while the shadow gets to guard you. Their voices rose over each other, their powers beginning to manifest in the room, cracks of light appearing in the air, the floor trembling, patches of cold void forming in the corners. Valerius could feel the delicate equilibrium he'd maintained for weeks unraveling, the jealous affections of cosmic entities turning inward, threatening to consume each other and everything around them. He tried to speak, to reassert control, but the argument had taken on a momentum of its own. Astra's starlight clashed with Terra's earthy resonance, creating sparks of crystallized energy that fell like burning snow. Nyx's void essence warped the space around her, making distances seem to stretch and compress. Umbra's shadows spread defensively, darkening the entire room. And outside, on the plain before Fort Desolation, Gorak's enhanced warriors began to stir, sensing the buildup of cosmic energies. The dark clouds above them pulsed faster, as if in response to the gathering storm within the fortress. Dawn was still hours away, but the battle was already beginning, not with swords and siege engines, but with the unraveling of the very affections that had been Valerius's greatest strength. The command tower felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Valerius stood at the center of the storm, for cosmic entities radiating enough power to shatter mountains glaring at each other across the cramped space. Astra's starlight flickered with jagged edges, casting sharp shadows that seemed to bleed darkness where Umbra stood. Terra's presence made the stone floor ripple like water, while Nyx's void dragon form shimmered with iridescent scales that drank the light from the room. "I will not be reduced to a messenger," Nyx hissed, her voice echoing from multiple dimensions at once. "My void tearing can transport entire battalions, not just carry your petty notes." Astra's celestial fire flared. "And I suppose my starfire is petty compared to your transportation? I've incinerated more enemies than you've carried messages." "Enough." Valerius's voice cut through the argument, calm but edged with the steel of command. He didn't raise it. Raising his voice would show weakness, and weakness in this room could mean reality itself unraveling. "Listen to me. All of you." He stepped forward, placing himself physically between them. The air crackled with competing energies, starlight, earth essence, void magic, and living shadow all pressing against his skin. He could feel their attention snap to him, their jealous affections focusing like lenses concentrating sunlight. "Terra," he said, meeting the planetary consciousness's gaze. Her eyes were like polished obsidian, reflecting the entire room. "You will create a fissure 300 yards long and 50 deep, precisely here." He pointed to the map spread across the table, his finger tapping a point between Gorak's main force and his reserves. "Divide their army. But you must time it perfectly, wait for my signal." Terra's expression softened, the stone floor settling. "For you, beloved. I will shape the earth itself." "Astra." He turned to the being of starlight. "Once Terra divides them, you rain precision fire on both divided groups. Target their commanders first, then their siege engines. But you must coordinate with Terra, your attacks begin the moment the fissure appears." Astra's starlight warmed, bathing him in gentle radiance. "They will burn like paper before my devotion." "Nyx." Valerius faced the void dragon. "You are not a messenger. You are our mobility. Once the enemy is divided and under fire, you transport Sergeant Kale's flanking force here." He indicated a position behind Gorak's left flank. "Then return for Rennick's scouts and place them here. Another point behind the right flank. Your speed decides this battle." Nyx's scales shimmered with satisfaction. "They will not know what transported death upon them." "Umbra." Valerius finally looked at the entity living in his shadow. "While all this happens, you eliminate every dark magic caster you can find. Start with the ones monitoring the phenomenon. Without their magic, Gorak's enhanced warriors become ordinary barbarians." Umbra's voice whispered from all directions at once. "They will die in the dark, never seeing what claims them." Valerius took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their expectations, their love, their dangerous devotion. "This only works if you work together. Terra's fissure enables Astra's firing solution. Astra's attacks create the chaos Nyx needs for transport. Nyx's mobility allows our human forces to flank. And Umbra's eliminations prevent magical counterattacks. You are all vital. You are all necessary. For me." The last two words hung in the air. He saw their expressions shift, the jealous tension easing into something more focused, more cooperative. They wanted to please him, to prove their worth. That was the lever he had to pull, over and over, until his hands bled. Dawn arrived not with gentle light but with the ominous glow of dark magic pulsing from Gorak's camp. Valerius stood in the central tower's observation post, his eyes scanning the battlefield through an enhanced viewing scope Rennick had scavenged from imperial ruins. 4,000 barbarians moved with unnatural coordination, their movements synchronized by the dark clouds churning above them. Among them, he spotted the telltale shimmer of monitoring artifacts, small crystalline devices attached to standard-bearers and commanders, recording everything. Lord Cassian's experiments. The thought made Valerius's jaw tighten. They wanted to study the unwanted throne of affection phenomenon. They wanted to understand why cosmic horrors loved a disgraced general. And they were willing to let Gorak kill him to see what happened. Ready, Valerius whispered, though he knew all four suitors could hear him regardless of distance. He felt their responses through the strange connection the phenomenon created, a warmth from Astra, a solid certainty from Terra, a fluid readiness from Nyx, and a cold focus from Umbra. Terra. Now. The ground didn't just crack, it screamed. A sound like continents tearing apart echoed across the scarred frontier as the earth split along the line Valerius had specified. Stone shattered, soil collapsed, and a chasm 50 feet deep and 300 yards long opened between Gorak's main force and his reserves. Barbarians tumbled into the abyss, their screams cut short by falling debris. The earth itself seemed to rebel against the dark magic tainting it. Valerius watched through his scope, his mind already calculating. Astra. Fire. Starlight rained from a clear sky. Not random bolts, but precise, calculated strikes that incinerated commanders first. A barbarian chieftain raising a warhorn vanished in a column of celestial fire. A siege engine operator clutching a dark crystal became ash. Then the engines themselves, wood and metal and dark magic dissolving under Astra's focused wrath. But Valerius could feel the strain. Through the phenomenon's connection, he sensed Astra's jealousy flaring each time Terra's earth-shaping drew his attention. He had to balance them, to feed both their need for acknowledgement. Beautiful work, Terra, he murmured, knowing she would hear. The fissure is perfectly positioned. Then, shifting his focus, Astra, your precision is exceptional. Target the standard-bearers with the monitoring artifacts. He felt their satisfaction, their pleasure at his praise. But maintaining that balance was like walking a razor's edge while juggling live coals. His head began to pound, a deep, throbbing ache behind his eyes. Nyx. Transport Kale's force. Reality tore above Gorak's left flank. Not a portal, but a void tier, a jagged rip in the fabric of space through which 50 of Fort Desolation's best fighters emerged, led by Sergeant Kale. The one-eyed veteran didn't hesitate, driving his force into the confused barbarian's rear. Valerius felt Nyx's desire for approval. Perfect timing, Nyx. Now Rennick's scouts. Another void tier, this time behind the right flank. Rennick and his trackers, experts at guerrilla warfare, began picking off stragglers and disrupting formations. But the balancing act grew more desperate. Valerius's vision blurred at the edges. Sweat soaked his uniform tunic. He was burning through his mental reserves faster than he'd anticipated, the constant need to monitor 4 reality-warping beings and direct a battle simultaneously draining him like a wound. Umbra, report. Whispers in his mind. *7 casters eliminated. The monitoring artifacts are failing. Their magic weakens, *. Valerius allowed himself a grim smile. Without their dark magic enhancements, Gorak's numerical advantage meant less. The barbarians were still fierce warriors, but they bled like any man. He watched as his plan unfolded with terrifying efficiency. Terra's fissure had divided the enemy. Astra's starfire decimated both halves. Nyx's transported forces attacked from unexpected directions. And Umbra's elimination stripped away their magical advantages. Gorak's army broke. Not a orderly retreat, but a rout. Barbarians threw down weapons and fled, their enhanced coordination shattered. The dark clouds above them began to dissipate, the pulsing magic fading as Umbra eliminated more casters. Valerius leaned against the observation post's railing, his breathing ragged. The headache had become a migraine hammering against his skull. His body trembled with exhaustion. He'd done it, managed all 4 suitors through an entire battle without a catastrophic lover's quarrel destroying everything. But as Gorak's main force shattered, the warlord himself did not flee. Valerius focused his scope on the command position. Gorak stood surrounded by his personal guard, but more importantly, Lord Cassian stood beside him, an imperial noble in pristine armor that looked absurdly out of place on the scarred frontier. Cassian was holding a device, a complex arrangement of crystals and wires, and he was speaking urgently to Gorak. Gorak nodded, a grim determination on his brutal face. He raised his axe, not to lead a charge, but to plunge it into the earth at his feet. Dark magic erupted from the point of impact. Not the controlled enhancements from before, but something wild, ancient, and hungry. The ground shuddered, not with Terra's controlled shaping, but with violent convulsions that made the earlier fissure seem like a minor crack. Terra's voice echoed in Valerius's mind, strained and alarmed. Beloved. Something awakens. Something, old. Older than me. I cannot control it, The earth split again, but this time not along clean lines. A jagged wound opened, and from it rose not rock or soil, but something massive and pale and segmented. A limb, thick as a fortress tower, clawed its way to the surface. Then another. Stone shattered as a creature, an ancient thing that had slept beneath the frontier for millennia, began to emerge. Gorak stood before it, his axe raised in triumph, dark magic swirling around him like a storm. Lord Cashin watched with clinical interest, his device recording everything. And Valerius realized with cold certainty that this had been the plan all along. Not just to kill him and study the phenomenon, but to force a reaction from his suitors. To see what happened when their beloved was threatened by something even they might not be able to control. The creature kept rising, its full scale still hidden beneath the earth. But what had emerged already dwarfed Fort Desolation's walls. And Terra's voice came again, this time with something Valerius had never heard from her before. Fear. Beloved. Run, The ground didn't just shake, it screamed. A sound like continents grinding against each other tore through the air as the earth before Fort Desolation's shattered walls erupted in a geyser of stone and dark energy. What emerged dwarfed even Terra's grandest fortifications, a creature of living geology twisted by corruption. Valerius watched from the command tower, his knuckles white on the stone railing. The elemental stood 300 feet tall, its body a patchwork of obsidian, granite, and veins of pulsating violet energy where Gorak's dark magic had fused with primordial earth. Each step sent tremors through the fortress that made even the seasoned veterans among his human garrison stagger. It moved with terrifying purpose, not toward the fortress first, but through what remained of Gorak's own broken forces. Barbarians who moments before had been rallying for a final charge now scattered like insects as massive stone hands swept through their ranks, crushing men and siege engines alike into bloody paste against the corrupted earth. Beloved, Terra's voice echoed in his mind, strained and trembling. This is wrong. The earth should not be made to suffer so. He could feel her distress through their connection, a planetary consciousness confronted with a perversion of her own domain. The elemental wasn't just an enemy, it was a violation of natural order, and Terra's revulsion mingled with her protective fury toward him. Focus, Valerius commanded, his voice cutting through the psychic chatter. Analysis. Weak points. Astra materialized beside him in a shimmer of starlight, her form flickering with agitation. The core, she said, her celestial eyes narrowing. There, in its chest, a nexus of the dark magic that animates it. But it's protected by layers of enchanted stone. My starfire alone cannot penetrate it. From the shadows at his feet, Umbra's voice emerged, cold and precise. The ritual site where Gorak summoned it still pulses with residual energy. If I can reach it, I may disrupt the connection. Nyx descended from a void tier above, her dragon form shrinking to humanoid size as she landed. The creature's structure is unstable, she reported, her voice carrying the echo of cosmic voids. The dark magic fights against the elemental's natural cohesion. Void anchors placed at key points could cause catastrophic failure. Valerius's mind raced, calculating angles, probabilities, and, most dangerously, the emotional calculus of his suitors. He could feel their jealous attention like weights on his consciousness, each wanting his focus, his approval, his affection. The strain of the battle already had them fraying at the edges, their reality-warping powers leaking into the space around them in dangerous ways. Astra's starfire left scorch marks on stone without her intending it. Terra's distress made the fortress walls groan. Nyx's void tears flickered unpredictably. Umbra's shadow stretched too far, too dark. New plan, Valerius said, forcing calm into his voice. Terra, you engage directly. Not to destroy it, to contain it. Create a geological arena, slow its advance. Astra, you'll need to wait for my signal, then hit the core with everything you have. Nyx, place void anchors at these 3 points. He projected mental images of the elemental structure, joints where stone met corrupted energy. Umbra, with me. We're going to the ritual site. Immediately, the jealousies flared. Why does she go with you? Astra demanded, starlight flaring around her. I should be at your side. My earth shaping is more crucial to your survival, Terra insisted, the tower floor cracking beneath her feet. Nyx's eyes narrowed. You give me secondary tasks while she remains in your shadow. Valerius felt the headache building behind his eyes, a physical manifestation of the mental strain. He took a breath, reaching for the diplomatic skills that had served him in imperial courts now turned to managing cosmic beings. Astra, your precision is unmatched, but I need you where you can see the whole battlefield. Terra, without your containment, we all die before Astra gets her shot. Nyx, your anchors aren't secondary, they're what makes Astra's strike possible. And Umbra. He met the shadows at his feet. The ritual site is protected by remnants of Gorak's magic. Your nature as living darkness gives you the best chance to penetrate those defenses. He paused, letting the logic settle. This isn't about who is most important to me. This is about using what each of you does best to protect what we've built here. Together. The words worked, but barely. He could feel their affections warring with their jealousies, the unwanted throne phenomenon pulling them in conflicting directions. But they nodded, one by one, their expressions a mix of resignation and fierce determination. Terra was the first to move. She stepped to the edge of the tower and placed her hands on the stone. The fortress responded, not with the graceful reshaping she usually employed, but with a groan of effort. The ground before the walls erupted in a series of massive stone pillars that rose to form a crude colosseum around the elemental. The creature roared, turning its attention to the new obstruction, and began hammering at the pillars with fists the size of siege towers. Stone shattered, but Terra poured more of herself into the repair, her form flickering between solid and ethereal as she expended power. Now, Nyx! Valerius shouted. The void dragon nodded and vanished into a tear in reality. She reappeared moments later at the elemental's left knee joint, placing a shimmering anchor of void energy that pulsed with anti-gravity. The creature stumbled, the stone around the anchor beginning to fracture. Nyx darted to the right elbow, then the base of its spine, placing anchors with practiced efficiency even as the elemental swatted at her. One blow connected, sending her crashing into a stone pillar, but she rolled with the impact and completed the third anchor. The elemental's movements grew jerky, unstable. The void anchors were doing their work, disrupting the dark magic that held its form together. Umbra, with me, Valerius said, drawing his sword, a mundane imperial blade that felt laughably inadequate against what they faced. But it wasn't the sword that mattered. It was the man wielding it, and the shadow that flowed from his feet to join him as he descended the tower stairs. The battlefield outside was chaos. What remained of Gorak's forces had broken completely, some fleeing, others crushed under the elemental's feet or caught in the crossfire of Terra's geological manipulations. Valerius moved with the disciplined pace of a career soldier, Umbra flowing ahead of him to eliminate the few barbarians still fighting. Her methods were efficient and silent, shadows extending, then retracting, leaving corpses with no visible wounds. The ritual site was exactly where Gorak had made his final stand, a circle of blackened earth 50 yards from the elemental's summoning point. Dark energy still crackled across the ground, and Valerius could feel the wrongness of it even from a distance. The air tasted of ozone and decay. There, Umbra said, her voice a whisper from his shadow. The focal point. A crystal embedded in the earth, still channeling power to the elemental. Can you disrupt it? I can try. But the defenses. She extended a tendril of darkness toward the circle. Immediately, violet energy lashed out, severing the tendril. Umbra recoiled, her form flickering with pain. It's keyed to repel anything not of the physical world. Valerius understood. The imperial mages who had enhanced Gorak's ritual had anticipated interference from beings like his suitors. They hadn't anticipated a mortal general walking into the heart of it. I'll go, he said. No. The protest came from all 4 suitors at once, a psychic shout of alarm that made him wince. But he was already moving. He stepped into the circle, and the dark energy reacted immediately. It felt like walking through freezing water that burned at the same time. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, but he forced himself forward, one step at a time, toward the pulsing crystal at the circle's center. The energy tore at him, ripping his uniform, scoring his skin with lines of frost and burn. He could feel his suitors panic through their connections, Astra's starfire gathering, Terra's earth trembling, Nyx's void tears opening and closing erratically, Umbra's shadows reaching for him only to be repelled again. Stay on task, he mentally commanded, though the effort made blood trickle from his nose. I'm not dead yet. He reached the crystal. It was about the size of his fist, embedded in the earth, throbbing with malevolent light. He raised his sword, brought it down, and the blade shattered against the crystal's surface. Dark energy surged up his arm, numbing it to the shoulder. Think, Valerius. The crystal was protected against direct assault. But Gorak's ritual had been designed to summon and control the elemental. Control required a connection. A connection could be redirected. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the pain, and placed his hands on the crystal. Not to break it, but to feel its workings. The dark magic was a crude, brutal thing, all force and domination. But beneath that, he sensed the elemental's primordial nature, the earth's essence that had been twisted but not destroyed. And he sensed something else, the unwanted throne phenomenon, reacting to his proximity. The crystal wasn't just channeling dark magic, it was studying the affection that bound his suitors to him, trying to understand it, replicate it, weaponize it. Now, Astra, he shouted, both aloud and through their connection. The core. High above, Astra gathered starlight. Not just the precision bolts she'd used before, but a concentrated beam of celestial fire that drew from her very essence. She aimed not at the elemental's chest, but at the exact point where Nyx's void anchors had weakened its structure. The beam struck, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the elemental screamed, a sound of stone breaking on a planetary scale. Cracks radiated from the impact point, violet energy leaking out like blood. The void anchors did their work, amplifying the damage, pulling the creature apart from the inside. Terra seized the opportunity. She didn't try to control the elemental, that was impossible now. Instead, she guided its collapse. The ground beneath it softened, then opened, a massive sinkhole swallowing the crumbling creature. Stone met stone in a cataclysmic grinding that shook the fortress to its foundations. Silence fell, broken only by the groan of settling earth and the distant cries of the wounded. Valerius remained kneeling at the ritual site, his hands still on the crystal. The dark energy had faded with the elemental's destruction, leaving the crystal inert. He pried it from the earth, his numb fingers barely functioning. Movement to his left. Gorak the bloody-handed emerged from behind a shattered siege engine, wounded but still standing, a jagged blade in his hand. The warlord's enhanced armor was cracked, one arm hanging useless at his side, but his eyes burned with fanatical fury. You. Gorak spat blood. You should have died. The phenomenon should have been ours to study, to control. Valerius rose slowly, every muscle protesting. It's not something to be controlled. It's not a weapon. Everything is a weapon, Gorak snarled, and charged. He didn't make it 3 steps. Umbra flowed from Valerius's shadow, her form solidifying into a blade of living darkness that pierced Gorak's chest from behind. The warlord staggered, looked down at the shadow blade protruding from his ribs, then collapsed. Valerius walked to where Gorak lay dying. He knelt beside the warlord, the captured crystal in one hand. The imperial noble behind this. Name him. Gorak coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. His enhanced physiology was keeping him alive, but not for long. Why should I tell you? You've destroyed everything. Because the ones who manipulated you don't care if you live or die. They used you. Tell me, and I'll make sure your warriors' deaths aren't completely meaningless. The warlord's eyes focused on him, hate and resignation warring in their depths. Lord Cashin was just the agent. The one giving orders, the one who wanted your phenomenon harvested. He gasped, his body shuddering. Grand Duke. Alaric Vorlex. Head of House Vorlex. The Emperor's own cousin. He said no more. The light faded from his eyes. Valerius stood, the name echoing in his mind. Grand Duke Alaric Vorlex. One of the most powerful nobles in the Empire, with connections to the throne itself. This conspiracy went higher than he'd imagined. He turned back toward Fort Desolation, and froze. His 4 suitors stood together at the edge of the ritual circle, their forms shimmering with expended power. Astra's starlight flickered like a guttering candle. Terra's connection to the earth felt thin, stretched. Nyx's void tears opened and closed randomly around her. Umbra's shadow barely held cohesion. But their eyes. Their eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made the hair on his arms stand up. The battle had drained them physically, but emotionally, it had done the opposite. The shared effort, the coordination, the moment when he'd risked his life in the ritual circle, it had stripped away the last barriers of their jealousies and left only raw, unfiltered affection. "Beloved," Astra whispered, and the word carried the weight of supernovae. Terra took a step forward, the earth sighing beneath her feet. "No one will ever threaten you again." Nyx's smile showed too many teeth. "We will tear apart any who try." Umbra simply flowed closer, her shadow enveloping his feet. "We are yours. Completely." Their eyes glowed, starlight, earth green, void black, shadow gray, and in that glow, Valerius saw not just protection, but possession. The unwanted throne phenomenon had deepened, solidified. They had worked together to save him, and in doing so, they had become more united in their devotion. More dangerous. He looked from their glowing eyes to the crystal in his hand, then to the corpse of Gorak the bloody-handed. He had won the battle. He had uncovered the conspiracy's leader. But as his cosmic suitors closed in around him, their affections a palpable force in the air, he wondered if he had just traded one kind of threat for another.